Miyabi was a crafter, one of the rare few in this world born with real building and gathering skill, able to store whole trees in a pocket dimension and spawn furniture out of raw material. He'd spent months traveling with an adventuring party, thinking he'd finally found a place to belong. But to the fighters, a guy who cooked, carried loot and fixed gear wasn't a real adventurer. He was bagged. After one dungeon run where his crafting slowed them down, the party leader told him flat out that crafters didn't earn their share, dumped him at the edge of a forest and left him behind. Alone and stinging from the betrayal, Miyabi started walking. Before long, he spotted a group of adventurers and a merchant being ambushed by 13 bandits. Among the guards was a young mage named Liz, a girl with a flower hair ornament. Without really thinking, Miyabi jumped out to distract the bandits. Liz used the opening to blast them with stone magic, and the guards quickly finished them off. It was the first time in a while someone actually looked glad to have him around. Miyabi's inventory skill let him store items in a pocket dimension, a rare gift usually reserved for specialized crafters. As they walked toward the city of Angelm, he chatted with Liz, who turned out to be a skilled C-rank adventurer despite her youthful appearance. Miyabi, stuck in a scrawny 15-year-old's body, felt like an adult trapped in a kid's frame. At the city gates, he hit a major problem. After getting cut from his party, he had no money and no proper ID to get through security. After explaining his situation to a stunned Liz, he realized starting over was going to be a lot more complicated than just building towers. Miyabi successfully entered the city of Angelm using a temporary pass provided by the guard. He wasn't alone. Liz, the young mage he helped earlier, actually lent him the money for the entry fee and even gave him an extra gold coin for a place to stay. Miyabi felt a bit awkward being baited out by a girl who looked years younger than him, but he agreed to her two conditions. He had to register as an adventurer so the guild could track his location, and he had to join her party as a supporter to help carry loot. After checking into a decent inn, they headed to the Adventure Guild. The place was packed with all sorts of fantasy races like elves and beastmen, making Miyabi feel like he was finally living the dream. At the counter, they met a beautiful, silver-haired clerk named Eleonora. While Liz turned in her quest report, Miyabi filled out his registration. He noticed most people skip the fine print, but being a responsible adult at heart, he read every word. Following Liz's advice, Miyabi registered his profession as a supporter. In this world, supporters handle the gear maintenance, cooking, and heavy lifting so the fighters can stay sharp. Liz, exhausted from her journey, headed back to the inn to sleep, leaving Miyabi with his brand new F-rank adventure card. When he tucked the card into his inventory and made it vanish, Eleonora was stunned. It turns out having a pocket dimension is incredibly rare for a beginner. Eager to test his crafting powers, Miyabi headed to the eastern forest before sunset to gather material. He needed a base of operations, so he used some sticks and stones to trigger his handcraft skill. Within seconds, a professional wooden workbench materialized. This confirmed his skills worked perfectly. He didn't need to manually build things, he just needed the recipe and the mana to spawn them. Next, he crafted a stone axe. Thanks to his high-level gathering efficiency and auto-loot skills, he didn't even have to chop the trees down manually. He just tapped a trunk 3 times, and the entire tree vanished directly into his inventory without making a sound. This was a huge advantage, as it meant he could strip a forest of resources without attracting dangerous monsters with the noise of falling timber. Hold up. Smash like and subscribe for more hidden manga gems. Now, I dare you to comment, "I'm loving it." I bet most of you won't do it. Alright, let's continue. On his way back, he ran into a stray goblin. Since Miyabi was never great at close-quarters combat, he panicked and used his throwing skill, hurling his stone axe with perfect accuracy. The axe took the goblin down instantly. Relieved but shaken, he gathered the monster's body and headed back to the safety of the city walls, picking up a few extra shiny rocks along the way. His life as a crafter in this new world was officially off to a productive start. After gathering wood, Miyabi headed back to the city but immediately got lost. Without a minimap, the crowded streets of Angelm were a maze, and he couldn't even remember the name of his inn. While wandering around, he spotted a young girl with navy hair and cat ears. This was Mel, a beastman adventurer who looked younger than him but was actually a high-level B-rank. Despite her quiet and slightly spacey personality, she figured out where he was staying just by knowing the area was safe for girls and didn't serve alcohol. As they walked to the inn, Miyabi was impressed by her skill. To thank her, he used his material dismantle ability to turn a log into a small wooden block inside his inventory, then used handcraft to carve it. In under 3 minutes, he created a cute, polished wooden cat figurine that looked just like her. Mel was thrilled, her tail wagging happily as she took the gift. This was a big moment for Miyabi. Before, back with his old party, his creations went unappreciated, but here, they were real things that could make people happy. The next morning, Miyabi woke up shivering from the cold. He met Liz for breakfast, and they bonded over a warm bowl of soup while discussing how brutal life is for adventurers during the winter. They headed to the guild to pick a job. While the lower rank boards were a mess of desperate people fighting over easy chores, Liz picked a tough C-rank quest to hunt 3 ground sheep. These monsters were huge, fast, and famous for their deadly charging attacks that could smash through city gates. Even though it was a dangerous job, the pay was great and Miyabi was determined to prove his worth as a supporter. They traveled 4 hours to a riverside plain where the sheep live. After a quick break, they spotted the target's giant, fluffy monsters with sharp horns. Liz wanted to play it safe and hide, explaining that these sheep were smart enough to flank enemies and would target mages first. She thought a frontal fight was the only way, but Miyabi had a different idea: a pitfall trap. Liz laughed it off, saying no one has time to dig a hole big enough to catch a charging monster. However, she didn't account for Miyabi's gathering efficiency skill. Using 2 stone shovels at once, Miyabi began digging at an impossible speed. Because his skill automatically sucked the dirt into his inventory, there was no mess and very little noise. In just 3 minutes, he dug a massive, deep pit, leaving Liz staring down at him in total shock, wondering if he was actually part mole. With the trap set, the hunt was officially on. As the ground sheep charged like runaway trucks, they didn't even notice the trap. All 3 plummeted 10 meters straight into the pit Miyabi had dug. Liz stood there in total shock, her brain struggling to process how 3 high-level monsters just got taken out by a literal hole in the ground. Miyabi tried to explain that pitfall traps are a basic move for crafters, but Liz wasn't having it. She knew what a pitfall was, she just couldn't believe he made one this big, this fast, and hidden so perfectly with magic-infused grass. Peering over the edge, Liz saw the sheep were finished. The fall had broken their legs and horns. Even though she was still weirded out by Miyabi's mole-like digging speed, she stepped up to finish them off. She used a high-level magic charge to blast them with ice spears, a move that left her totally drained. While she recovered, Miyabi got to work. He used his crafting skills to snap together stone blocks into a temporary staircase, walked down into the pit and touched the massive carcasses. In a flash, all 3 giant sheep vanished into his inventory. Liz watched him climb back out and refill the massive hole in seconds, making the meadow look like nothing had ever happened. She finally snapped, demanding to know how his inventory could possibly hold tons of dirt and 3 giant monsters at once. Miyabi tried to play it cool, explaining that in his experience, the more you craft and gather, the more your pocket dimension expands. Liz sighed, giving up on trying to understand his logic. To her, crafters were supposed to be low-paid handymen who fixed fences, not guys who carried entire forests in their pockets. They sat down for a lunch break, eating fresh bread Miyabi had kept warm in his time-frozen inventory. Liz admitted that most crafters in this world are seen as jack-of-all-trades, master of none. They usually can't go out and gather rare materials because they aren't fighters, so they get stuck doing cheap repairs for the city. Miyabi realized that his game-style progression made him a total anomaly compared to the struggling workers of this world. Since they were now technically a team, Miyabi asked if he could keep the sheep's wool for crafting. Liz agreed instantly. Liz started dreaming about moving to a fancy inn with a big communal bath, and Miyabi was all for it. Wiping down with a damp cloth in a freezing room was getting old fast. Liz joked that she wasn't letting him leave the party anytime soon. He was way too useful to let go. Miyabi just laughed, happy to have a friend and a lead on some high-quality wool for his next project. After lunch, Miyabi and Liz headed back to the city, but Miyabi couldn't stop his crafter itch. He spent the whole walk gathering wood and stones, even digging up dirt whenever he saw a nice mound. Liz watched him in total disbelief, joking that he wasn't even a human anymore, just a giant mole because of his insane digging speed. They reached the Adventure Guild at sunset and handed their cards to Eleonora, the silver-haired clerk. When they reported finishing the high-level ground sheep quest so quickly, Eleonora was stunned. Liz acted a bit awkward, probably too embarrassed to admit they won by basically dropping the monsters into a giant hole. When it came time to turn in the materials, Miyabi used his material dismantle skill to instantly process the carcasses inside his inventory. He slammed a massive pile of meat, horns, and claws onto the counter, making the poor clerk yelp in surprise. The guild turned into a madhouse. Beefy workers rushed out to move the mountain of meat, shouting about how it was impossible for 2 kids to carry that much weight. The whole building went silent as other adventurers stared in awe. Miyabi felt like a total hero, especially when a little kid nearby cheered for him. Liz explained that ground sheep meat is a high-end delicacy, and since it was so fresh, it could even be eaten raw. In the end, they walked away with 200 gold coins, roughly $20,000. After a little back and forth about who did more work, they decided to split the money 50/50, making them both officially rich. The next morning was freezing and rainy. Miyabi met Liz in the dining hall where she was shivering over a bowl of soup. Since they had the cash, they decided to move to a much nicer inn called Wind and Thunder Pavilion. It was 4 times more expensive, but it had a massive public bath with hot steam, which was worth every penny. While Liz stayed behind to soak and relax, Miyabi headed back out into the rain. He knew he couldn't rely on lucky high-paying quests forever, so he needed to prep for the long haul, and he really wanted to cook some of that sheep meat. He went on a massive shopping spree, using his $10,000 share to buy out half a vegetable stall. The shopkeeper initially looked down on him for being a kid. But the second Miyabi flashed a gold coin, the guy became his best friend. Miyabi stocked up on pots, flour, and expensive spices like salt and pepper, ignoring the crazy prices just so he could have a decent meal. Next, he visited the city's biggest blacksmith shop to study real craftsmen. Inside, he met a grumpy old dwarf named Weiss. Weiss realized Miyabi was a crafter because of how intently he was studying the blade. When Miyabi showed him a basic stone axe he'd made, Weiss was surprisingly impressed by the clean work. He liked Miyabi's spirit so much that he sold him iron ore at a discount and even gave him extra throwing knives for free. He told Miyabi to come back once he crafted a real weapon, and Miyabi promised to make something that would blow the old dwarf's mind. By the time he left, the sun was down and Miyabi was lost again. Luckily, he ran into Mel, the quiet cat-girl adventurer from before. She realized he was lost and led him back to the inn, which turned out to be where she was staying too. To thank her, Miyabi used his skills to make a high-quality stuffed cat toy. He used magic to stitch it instantly, and even used the ground sheep wool to give it a realistic, fluffy coat. Mel was so happy she actually clapped her hands and finally remembered his name. Feeling accomplished, Miyabi headed straight for the hot baths to end his busy day. The next morning, Miyabi headed back to the Adventure Guild with Liz. She was in a great mood after her long soak in the hot baths, looking refreshed and smelling like flowers. At the guild, they found the quest board a bit lacking. The recent rain made traveling to far-off monster dens difficult and risky, and Liz didn't want to risk a dangerous night camping in the cold. Since there were no good combat jobs, Miyabi suggested they spend the day gathering materials instead. Liz agreed to act as his bodyguard, though she was skeptical about how much fun a day of woodcutting could be. As they headed out, she admitted she preferred working with Miyabi because she found large parties exhausting. They spent the next several hours trekking through 4 different forests. Miyabi was in heaven, using his autoloot skill to instantly vanish various types of wood, oak, pine, beech, and cypress into his inventory without making a sound. Liz watched in total disbelief, noting that normally, a logging operation requires a small army of soldiers and loud axes that attract every monster for miles. To her, Miyabi wasn't just a crafter. He was a one-man construction crew. By lunchtime, they reached a scenic riverbank. While Liz collapsed from the long hike, Miyabi decided a simple break wasn't enough. He used his skills to craft stone buckets to collect fresh water, then shocked Liz by building a temporary living room right on the riverbank. He laid down wooden floor blocks so they wouldn't have to sit on the damp ground and crafted high-end chairs and a table. To top it off, he used the ground sheep wool he'd gathered earlier to make soft, fluffy cushions and a warm lap blanket for Liz. Miyabi didn't stop there. He built a functional stone stove and used a fire enchantment on some wood to get a cooking fire going instantly. Using the ingredients he bought the day before, he whipped up a feast: fresh herbal tea, fluffy milk bread, and sizzling grilled mutton with vegetable. The smell was so good it actually attracted a few stray goblins, but a grumpy, hungry Liz took them out with a single blast of ice magic before they could even get close. As they ate, Liz admitted the food was better than most restaurants and joked that Miyabi should just open a bakery. In the afternoon, they hit one last forest. Miyabi's stone tools kept breaking from the heavy use, making him realize he needed to upgrade to iron soon. However, since mines are strictly regulated by the government, he knew he couldn't just go digging for ore wherever he wanted. While he pondered his next move, Liz suddenly signaled for silence. A wolf was stalking them through the thick brush. Before the beast could pounce, Liz fired a volley of ice needles into the grass, taking it down instantly. Miyabi was genuinely impressed by her reflexes. Without a mini-map or game music to warn him, he realized how dangerous this world truly was for someone without combat skills. By the time they finished for the day, Miyabi had collected 30 wolf carcasses and enough wood to build a mansion. As they headed back to the city, Liz told him she'd be happy to help him gather materials anytime the quest board looked boring. Miyabi thanked her, feeling lucky to have a partner who could keep him safe while he focused on his obsession with building. As they walked back to the city at sunset, Miyabi and Liz followed a large group of adventurers. Seeing the other party covered in mud and looking miserable, Miyabi pointed them out to Liz. He guessed they had picked a fight they weren't ready for on a bad road, ruining their gear and their mood. He used this as a lesson for Liz, who had been feeling down about only knowing mid-level magic. He told her that being a great adventurer isn't just about raw power, it's about making smart choices, staying clean, and being prepared. He reminded her that she was already professional enough to keep them safe and dry, which was more than those other guys could say. Liz acted tough and gave him a playful kick, but she quietly thanked him for the boost in confidence. Over the next week, the duo settled into a comfortable routine. Miyabi's crafting skills made their lives surprisingly luxurious. One afternoon, while out on a quest, Miyabi decided he wanted fish for lunch. Instead of using a rod, he used his earth block skill to literally dam up a section of the river, trapping the fish in a small pool. He then finished them off with throwing knives. Liz was skeptical at first, warning him that cooking fish over a fire usually attracts monsters with the smoke and smell. Miyabi just smiled and used his game logic. By processing the fish inside his inventory with mana, he crafted perfectly grilled fish instantly, no smoke, no fire, and no waiting. Liz was blown away by the taste and the convenience, quickly becoming a fan of his illegal trail cooking. While she happily munched away, Miyabi sat nearby meticulously picking every single bone out of his portion with handmade chopsticks, proving he was just as obsessed with details as he was with building. After lunch, they headed back to the guild early. Liz went to the library to study new spells, while Miyabi decided to head to the city gates to experiment with enchanting. He'd enchanted plenty of stones before back when he made glowing blocks for fun, but here he had to be careful not to accidentally burn the city down. He started with a wooden block, applying a fire enchantment. It worked too well, the block immediately burst into flames, forcing him to douse it with a bucket of water. He realized that in the real world, materials react physically to magic. If he put fire on wood, it burned. If he put it on dirt, the dirt just got dangerously hot. Through trial and error, he figured out the difference between enchanting something with fire magic, which makes it burn or explode, and fire attribute, which just gives it the properties of fire, like resistance to cold. Miyabi spent the rest of the afternoon practicing delicate mana control. He treated the magic like he was trying to pick up soft tofu with chopsticks, using the tiniest amounts of energy to get the effect he wanted without destroying the item. It was exhausting work that required total focus, but he knew this was the key to making high-level gear. As his hands grew cold in the evening air, he thought about how Liz must feel when she's concentrating on her spells, feeling a new sense of respect for his partner's hard work. After a few minutes of intense focus, Miyabi successfully infused a wooden block with mana, creating a heat block. Unlike his earlier attempt that set the wood on fire, this one just stayed comfortably warm. He realized he could use this to build a dream house with built-in floor and wall heating perfect for the freezing winter. He even thought about enchanting clothes to make wearable heaters. But he quickly realized asking Liz for her undergarments to test the theory would definitely make him look like a total creep. Deciding to play it safe, he spent the rest of the evening practicing on scrap cloth, burning through quite a few pieces before finding the right balance between warm and on fire. By the time he finished, it was pitch black. He barely made it through the city gates before they closed, getting some suspicious looks from the guards. On his way to the inn, he ran into Mel, the catgirl adventurer, for the third time. She wasn't lost. She was heading to a blacksmith because her sword was badly chipped and cracked. Miyabi took a look at the weapon and saw it was in terrible shape, likely because Mel never bothered to maintain it. He decided to tag along to the shop, curious to see how a professional would handle the repair. They ended up at the shop of Weiss, the grumpy dwarf Miyabi had met before. Weiss immediately started yelling at Mel for trashing her gear again, but he stopped when he noticed Miyabi. Since his shop was backed up with work, Weiss decided to test Miyabi's skills by making him perform a repair using material synthesis. He handed Miyabi 2 massive red dragon fangs and told him to fix Mel's sword. Repairing high-level gear with dragon parts is notoriously difficult because the mana in the material is wild and hard to control. But Weiss knew Miyabi was more than just a typical crafter. Miyabi spent an hour in absolute focus, sweating as he struggled to guide the dragon's power into the sword's cracks. He had to keep the dragon's mana from spilling out while stitching the blade back together. By the time he finished, the sword looked brand new, not a single scratch remained. Weiss was stunned. Even he would have used 3 dragon fangs to do the same job, and Miyabi managed to fully restore the weapon's durability with just 2. As a reward and an apology for the test, Weiss gave Miyabi 2 extra dragon fangs to keep. Mel was thrilled to have her sword back, and Miyabi realized he'd just gained a reputation as a master repairman, even if it meant more tiring work in the future. The next morning at the guild, Liz was staring at the quest board with a frustrated look. Good jobs were getting hard to find. Miyabi suggested they branch out into tougher areas, but that meant camping out in the wild. He worried that camping as a duo might be awkward for a young girl like Liz, so he let her lead the decision-making. He eventually pointed out a forest investigation quest. 2 groups of adventurers had gone missing near a lake while gathering herbs, and the area was now off-limits. Liz was hesitant because investigation work is high pressure. If you report the wrong info, people die. However, Miyabi convinced her that with her scouting skills and his ability to dig a hole and hide them underground in 10 seconds, they'd be perfectly safe. He framed it as a way for her to build a reputation and eventually reach A rank. His logic worked, and Liz excitedly grabbed the quest. As they signed up with the receptionist, Eleonora, she was surprised to see a crafter going on a dangerous investigation, but she was happy to see Liz finally working in a team. They spent the next 5 days trekking 2 hours to the forest every morning. The work was slow and tedious. They moved in total silence, with Liz using wind magic to listen for distant sound. Surprisingly, the forest was too quiet. Usually these woods were crawling with wolves, but they only saw a few young ones. It was weird. If humans weren't hunting there, the monster population should have exploded, not shrunk. To help out, Miyabi started making detailed maps and charts using homemade charcoal pencils and paper, which really impressed Liz. She teased him for being such a hardworking dad figure, which made him feel both proud and a little old. By the 5th day, they pushed deep into the forest toward the lake where the herbs grew. They stayed low, moving only when Liz gave the signal. When they reached the water, they spotted something chilling. A leftover campfire that hadn't been put out properly. It meant the previous adventurers had been interrupted so suddenly they didn't even have time to kick dirt on the flames. As the sun began to set, the mystery was solved. Two massive 2-meter-tall monsters walked out of the trees. They were black orcs, rare, muscle-bound variants that use dark magic and are much smarter than regular orcs. One of them was carrying dead wolves like snacks, explaining why the forest felt so empty. These things were C-rank threats, way above what a normal herb-gathering team could handle. The orcs headed deeper into the woods, likely toward a hidden camp. Liz decided they should tail them to find their base. Since it was getting dark, they'd have to spend the night in the forest. Miyabi asked if she was okay sharing a cramped space with him overnight, but Liz just laughed it off. She told him he felt more like a reliable dad than a guy her age, which both relieved and slightly offended him. With their plan set, they began quietly following the monsters into the dark. As they followed the black orcs, the forest turned pitch black. Miyabi and Liz had to keep their distance to avoid being spotted, relying entirely on Liz's wind magic to track the monsters' footsteps. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the orcs had built a crude village by knocking down trees. Miyabi counted 11 of them, surrounded by piles of bones and glowing eyes. Realizing they were outnumbered in the heart of the forest, they decided to hide. Miyabi used his shovel to quietly dig a hole deep enough for them to climb into, then sealed the roof with dirt blocks to hide from the surface. Once they were safe underground, he decided to make the space more livable. He dug out a massive room 10 meters down and placed wooden blocks on the ceiling. By infusing them with light magic, he created light blocks that glowed with a warm, cozy light, much better than a smelly torch. However, the underground air was freezing. Liz was shivering so hard her breath was visible, and since they couldn't light a fire without suffocating from the smoke, Miyabi had a better plan. He lined the entire floor, walls, and ceiling with wood, and spent nearly an hour carefully infusing them with fire magic. He had to be precise to make sure the room stayed warm without catching fire. The result was a dream basement where every surface acted like a heater. The room warmed up instantly, and Liz was so relieved she started thawing out her frozen hands and feet on the floor. To make things even better, Miyabi pulled out a crafting table and made a high-end bed using fluffy sheep wool. Liz was so impressed by the comfort that she started joking around, treating Miyabi like a doting dad who provides everything. They sat down to a dinner of grilled meat, and as they ate, they discussed the mission. Liz suggested that instead of just reporting the monsters, they should try to take them out. She explained that black orcs are usually the strongest things in an area, so if they beat them, the forest would be safe. But then she admitted her real motivation. Black orc meat is famous for being delicious. Miyabi laughed, realizing she was just hungry for a gourmet meal. They spent the rest of the evening planning a surprise attack for the morning, knowing they had a safe, warm place to retreat to if things went sideways. Despite the danger outside, Liz climbed into her fluffy bed and fell fast asleep, confident that her dad partner would keep watch. Early the next morning, Miyabi headed up to the surface to scout. He spotted 2 black orcs on guard duty, but they were half asleep and totally careless. He noticed they were carrying iron swords that looked like they belonged to the missing adventurers, but he shook off the dark thought to stay focused. He headed back down to wake up Liz, who was sleeping so deeply on the fluffy bed that she actually called him Dad in her sleep. After a bit of teasing and a very red-faced Liz insisting she just overslept, they headed out to start their surprise attack. They positioned themselves near the camp just as the sun started coming up. Liz was still embarrassed about the dad comment, but she locked in the second they saw the monsters. She summoned 2 ice spears, her limit at one time, and took out the 2 guards instantly. As the rest of the pack woke up and rushed toward them, Miyabi and Liz dived into the hole he had dug. He quickly sealed the entrance with hardened blocks, which were dirt blocks infused with earth magic to make them tough as stone. This was their mole strategy. Miyabi had spent the night digging a network of tunnels with multiple exits around the camp. They would pop up, Liz would fire off magic to take down an orc, and then they'd vanish back underground and seal the hole before the monsters could reach them. The orcs were strong, but they weren't smart enough to handle a game of deadly whack-a-mole. Whenever they got close to one hole, Miyabi would bang on the walls of a different tunnel to distract them, letting Liz pop up elsewhere for a clear shot. Eventually, the last few orcs got desperate and charged, but they fell right into a massive pit trap Miyabi had pre-dug. The fight ended without a scratch on either of them. After staying in the forest for 3 more days to make sure the area was truly safe, they headed back to the guild. Since Liz was busy scouting, Miyabi had spent his downtime writing a massive, professional report filled with charts, maps, and monster data. When they handed it to the receptionist, Eleonora, she was stunned. She had never seen an adventurer turn in such a detailed document. It looked like something a high-level government official would write. As Eleonora read through it, her face went pale. She explained that 11 black orcs living together was a major disaster waiting to happen if they start breeding in those numbers. They can actually attract dragons to the area. She started panicking, calling for B-rank reinforcements to save the city, until Miyabi calmly interrupted and told her they already took care of it. The entire guild went silent. Nobody believed a young girl and a crafter could wipe out a C-rank squad that usually required 2 veteran teams. The staff started whispering that it must be a mistake or a lie, and Eleonora even tried to give them an out by suggesting they probably just fought regular orcs. To prove it, and to show up the staff who were gossiping about their diets instead of working, Miyabi decided to show the evidence. He pulled the black orc meat out of his inventory, stacking so much of it on the counter that it created a literal wall of meat between him and Eleonora. The sight of the high-grade, pitch-black meat sent the guild into a frenzy. Eleonora went from confused to screaming for the dismantling team to drop everything and get to the front desk. As a group of buff guys rushed out to handle the haul, Miyabi heard them shouting about the meat prince being back. It turns out his habit of bringing in massive amounts of high-quality monster meat had already earned him a weirdly legendary nickname among the guild staff. After finishing the forest investigation, Miyabi and Liz were called into a private meeting with the guild master, Zion. Liz was a nervous wreck because Zion was a former A-rank adventurer with a legendary reputation. When they entered the VIP room, Zion looked intimidating, a tough, middle-aged man who didn't look like he played around. He immediately grilled them, asking if they'd cheated or had outside help with their report since it was way too professional for a C-rank team. Liz stood her ground, insisting they did it all themselves. Zion's tough act eventually cracked when he revealed he used to be party members with Liz's dad. He knew her family was honest to a fault, so he trusted their word. He also looked at Liz's records and realized she was actually an elite adventurer with a 98% success rate, even though she always doubted herself. The conversation got awkward when Liz tried to give Miyabi credit for the fighting. Zion and the receptionist, Eleonora, were confused because Miyabi was registered as a crafter and a supporter, not a fighter. Miyabi tried to play it cool, saying he only fought weak stuff like goblins, but Liz kept hinting that he was way more powerful than he let on. Zion decided not to pry too much, though he admitted the guild staff was already gossiping about Miyabi's insane skills. And his new nickname, the Meat Prince. Miyabi then dropped a bombshell. He had only turned in a fraction of the black orc meat he actually had. When he offered to hand over the rest, Zion was stunned. He told Miyabi to keep it in his inventory for now and only sell 1 orc's worth of meat per month so they wouldn't crash the market price. Since the total haul was worth over 100 gold coins, it was a massive fortune. Liz joked that Miyabi was basically a walking warehouse because he was also carrying enough lumber to build an entire forest. After the meeting, Miyabi went to the guild's private warehouse with Eleonora to drop off the rest of the loot. As he pulled out piles of hides, fangs, and bones, Eleonora was impressed by how perfectly he had dismantled the monsters. She revealed she used to be an adventurer herself before retiring to work at the guild, which explained why she was so sharp. Before leaving, Miyabi pulled out 6 adventurer tags he had found near the orc camp. He had waited until Liz was gone to hand them over because he didn't want to upset her with proof that the missing adventurers were dead. It was a heavy moment, especially hearing that one of the men had just gotten married. Eleonora noticed Miyabi's kindness in protecting Liz from the news and told him that despite his weirdly high skills, he still had a good human heart. Feeling a bit lighter after sharing the burden, Miyabi finished the paperwork and headed out. When Miyabi met with the receptionist Eleonora to finish the paperwork, things got surprisingly emotional. Eleonora realized Miyabi was keeping the truth about the dead adventurers from Liz to protect her feelings. Miyabi even asked to donate his entire share of the mission reward, over 100 gold coins, to the widow of one of the fallen men. Eleonora was shocked because most people wouldn't give away a fortune to a stranger, but she promised to handle it quietly. She gave Miyabi a warm, beautiful smile that left him totally flustered, teasing him that he was like a cute little brother. 2 days later, Miyabi and Liz were called back to the guild for their big payday. Between the mission reward and the sale of the black orc parts, they walked away with a staggering 540 gold coins. Liz was so overwhelmed by the mountain of money that she completely froze up. Since carrying that much cash is dangerous, Miyabi decided to keep their funds in the guild's vault for safety. To his surprise, the guild also promoted him to D rank. It wasn't just because of his skills. The guild wanted to protect him from jealous low-rank adventurers who might cause trouble seeing a beginner get so rich. Eleonora also handed Miyabi a formal letter of recommendation for the merchant guild. She explained that with the amount of money they were making, they'd need it to buy or rent property. She admitted the guild was basically trying to claim him so he wouldn't leave the city as his ability to supply high-quality materials was too valuable to lose. During the meeting, a funny secret came out. Liz had also been secretly donating half her rewards to grieving families for years. It turned out both of them were way too kind for their own good, making them the perfect, soft-hearted duo. That night, Liz visited Miyabi's room with a big idea. She wanted them to get a permanent base together. She felt safe with him, saying he reminded her of the cozy home life she had with her dad. Since staying at a fancy inn was costing them a fortune every month, renting a house actually made more financial sense. Miyabi agreed, though he worried about the gossip of a guy and girl living together. Liz didn't care. She trusted him completely, mostly because she'd already accidentally called him dad during their camping trip. Before leaving, Liz got really shy and handed Miyabi a small bag. Inside were several pairs of her socks and underwear. She'd noticed how he'd been making blankets and cushions warm with magic, and wanted him to do the same for her clothes so she wouldn't freeze during the winter. Miyabi was incredibly embarrassed to be holding her laundry, but Liz insisted she'd bought them new just for this. As he worked his infusion magic on the pink fabric, Liz started nerding out, asking him complex questions about magical theory that he didn't understand at all. Despite the awkwardness, it was clear their bond was stronger than ever as they prepared to start their new life as homeowners. The next morning, Liz was in a great mood, skipping along and swinging her staff around so much it almost hit Miyabi. She was feeling cozy in her new magically warmed clothes, but her excitement meant she'd overslept, leaving the streets empty as they headed to the Merchant Guild. Unlike the rowdy Adventure Guild, this place was fancy stone building, suited staff who looked like butlers, and a vibe so professional Miyabi felt like he shouldn't even set a piece of meat on the polished counter. They were there to find a place to live. Miyabi wanted a big plot of land to build his own house from scratch, rather than just renting a room. A polite clerk looked over their recommendation letter from the guild master and was impressed that such young adventurers had high-level backing. However, finding just a plot of land was tough. Most places came with a house already built. After searching his records, the clerk found only one option that fit their needs. There was a catch, though. The property was right across the street from the Lord's mansion. It was a massive, overgrown mess with a rotting house that hadn't been touched in 10 years. Most nobles avoided it because living directly under the Lord's nose was way too much pressure. Miyabi, however, saw an opportunity. If they lived there and did a good job, they might get direct quests from the Lord himself. They headed over to check it out and found the land was perfect, but the guards at the mansion were staring them down with terrifying, suspicious glares. Liz joked that she'd probably snap after 2 days of being watched like a criminal every time she left the house. While they were debating the creepy guards, they ran into Vice the blacksmith and Mel. It turned out Vice had basically raised Liz after her father died and Mel was a regular training partner of hers. Vice was at the mansion to fix a leaky roof and a broken bath for the Lord. When he heard Miyabi wanted to build a house right there, he saw a chance to stir up some trouble. He dragged them inside the mansion to meet the Lord, a dignified man named Trent. Vice immediately started talking Miyabi up, claiming he was a genius crafter who could repair things faster and better than a master blacksmith. He even joked that Miyabi was planning to build a masterpiece across the street just to show off. Lord Trent was intrigued. He told Miyabi that if he could prove his skills by handling the mansion's repairs today, he would tell the guards to stop glaring at them and treat them like neighbors instead. Miyabi realized he'd just been walked into a high-stakes job interview, but with their dream home on the line, he knew he had to deliver. Miyabi headed to the mansion's bathhouse to begin the repairs. The place was a mess of cracked stone and aging masonry, but since it was a noble's home, it was built with high-end material. Lord Trent and the dwarf Weiss watched him closely, turning the job into a high-pressure practical exam. Miyabi realized the damage wasn't just wear and tear. The old enchantments holding the building together had finally snapped. He didn't break a sweat. Using his game-like precision, he repaired the massive cracks in seconds. To make the work seamless, he used mana processing to blend the new stone with the old until the surface was perfectly smooth. He even cleaned up the leftover materials by stashing them in his inventory, which impressed Weiss. When it came to the walls and ceiling, Miyabi decided to go all out. Instead of doing small patches that would take a normal worker all day, he prepared a massive, wide-range, water-resistance enchantment. When Miyabi told them he'd be finished with the entire room in an hour, Lord Trent nearly lost his cool. In this world, enchanting a space that large usually took days of careful work. Weiss just laughed, admitting that while he was a master blacksmith, Miyabi's magic control was on a whole different level. Leaving the two older men in a state of shock, Miyabi finished the job and headed back to the drawing room. He opened the door and found a bizarre scene. Liz, Mel, and a third girl were in the middle of a serious game of make-believe with stuffed animals. The new girl, a pink-haired noble named Chiffon, was playing the villain with a toy pig cornering Liz's bear. It was a total bad-end scenario until they noticed Miyabi. Everyone turned bright red, and Chiffon, the Lord's daughter, tripped over her words trying to introduce herself. It turned out Mel had started the game, and the other two were just too polite to stop. The awkwardness peaked when Mel revealed that Miyabi was the one who actually made the cute cat toy Chiffon was holding. The young noblewoman looked like she was about to explode from embarrassment, but she was clearly impressed by his craftsmanship. The fun was cut short when Lord Trents entered the room with his head maid. He looked incredibly pleased. The bathhouse was perfect, and the report from the Adventure Guild confirmed that Liz and Miyabi were the real deal. Trents dropped a major offer. He wanted them to help escort Chiffon to the Royal Academy in a week. Usually this was a job for B-rank veterans, but the regular team was running late. He wanted Liz and Miyabi to join the mission alongside an A-rank party to act as friends and peers for his daughter. Liz was so stressed by the sudden promotion that she started making weird glitchy noises, but Miyabi stepped in to accept the job, realizing it was a huge opportunity to build a high-level reputation. As a reward for the repairs, Trents handed over a formal recommendation letter for the land across the street. He'd already told the guards to treat them like guests, clearing the way for Miyabi to finally build his dream base. While Liz and Chiffon went back to playing with toys to escape the stress of the meeting, Miyabi shook hands with the Lord. He had the money, the land, and the official backing of a noble now. He just needed to start building. Miyabi took Liz's adventure card, since she was still busy playing with stuffed animals to escape reality, and headed to the commercial guild. Unlike his quiet morning visit, the hall was now packed with wealthy merchants and nobles. Feeling out of place, he approached the counter. The clerk from earlier recognized him but assumed he'd just forgotten something. When Miyabi announced he wanted to buy the haunted land near the gate, the clerk slammed his hands on the desk in shock, asking if Miyabi had nerves of steel to deal with those scary guards. The sudden shout silenced the room, making Miyabi feel awkward as everyone stared. He handed over the recommendation letter from Lord Torrance to prove he was serious. The clerk's voice cracked as he yelled, "The Lord's recommendation." This caused a total scene. A group of staff huddled to check the seal, whispering about how the Lord never gives these out and calling the property Dead Island because it was a nightmare for staff to manage. They decided Miyabi must be a super elite adventurer, a title he found a bit cheesy. The clerk warned him that once he signed, there was no backing out of the rent. Miyabi mentioned that Weiss, the legendary blacksmith, had also recommended him. This was the final blow for the clerk, who nearly fainted. He explained that Weiss is a national legend, and being recognized by him is the ultimate proof of skill. Miyabi tried to play it down, saying he just helps Weiss with chores, but that only made the clerk more hysterical. Despite the chaos, the contract was finalized, and the guild even waived the down payment as a sign of respect for his high-level connection. The next day, Miyabi started on their temporary base. While he wanted to focus entirely on building, he knew he had to keep up his adventurer work to maintain his noble connections and help Liz reach her dream of visiting the royal library. He decided to keep the house looking modest on the outside so he wouldn't outshine the Lord's mansion across the street, but he planned to make the inside incredibly high-tech and comfy. Miyabi started digging a massive foundation. When Liz and her friend Mel stopped by, Mel was terrified by the size of the hole, wondering if the ground was collapsing. Liz, used to Miyabi's weird powers, just shrugged it off and took Mel away to introduce themselves to the neighbors. Left alone, Miyabi finished the foundation in 2 hours and started framing the house with wood. He designed a spacious first floor with a big kitchen and a living room for strategy meetings. While setting up the kitchen, Miyabi discovered a hidden perk. His crafting skill gave him instant recipes. He realized he could make soy sauce, miso, and ketchup from scratch, luxury items that were hard to find in this world. Excited but focused, he finished the main house and moved on to his real passion project, a massive bathhouse. Since he couldn't use water or fire magic directly, he experimented with enchantments. He created a water source block that constantly leaked fresh water and paired it with a heat block to warm it up. By adding a breeze block that pushed out air, he even figured out how to make a jet tub. He spent the rest of the day obsessing over the details, using his skills to make a beautiful indoor hot spring with rocks and greenery. He even added traps and pitfalls outside the bathhouse to keep creeps away. By the time the sun went down, the exterior looked like a simple shack, but the inside was a luxury spa that would make any noble jealous. As night fell, Miyabi was finishing up the interior of their new base when Liz and Mel arrived. They had officially canceled their stay at the inn and were ready to move in. While Liz was thrilled to be back in a real bed, Mel was having a minor breakdown. She kept touching the walls and floor, terrified by how fast a high-quality house had appeared out of nowhere. Miyabi invited them in, handing them slippers and special heat-enchanted cushions he'd made. Mel was incredibly suspicious of the warm cushions, even joking that they must be stuffed with magma, but as soon as she felt the cozy heat, her guard dropped. Miyabi realized that while Liz was used to his crazy building speed, Mel's shocked reaction was much more satisfying for a craftsman. To help them relax after a long day, Miyabi whipped up a quick cheat meal using his instant crafting skills. Sweet and salty pork sandwiches with fresh lettuce and a rich, creamy pumpkin soup. The girls were stunned by the flavor, with Mel becoming so obsessed with the soup that she forgot how to speak. While they ate, Miyabi brought up the cost of ingredients. Since they were a party now, he wanted to be fair about expenses. Liz insisted he charge the party for everything, admitting she often forgets to pay because his food is so good she loses her train of thought. As they settled the finances, Mel, who was struggling with the hot soup because of her sensitive cat tongue, eventually finished 3 bowls and a sandwich, looking completely defeated by how good the meal was. Miyabi even let her take a heated cushion home as a thank you for helping Liz, which earned him a wagging tail and a very happy friend. The next morning, however, Miyabi woke up to a screaming Liz. She was furious, not because something was wrong, but because the bathhouse Miyabi built was too good. She had intended to take a quick dip to wake up, but ended up staying in the luxury jet tub for 2 hours because it felt like a high-end spa. She warned him to stay within the realm of common sense when building, fearing that if people saw how they were living, they'd get in trouble with the local noble. Miyabi assured her he'd hidden the house behind trees and added pitfalls around the perimeter to keep out creeps. Later that day, the duo headed to the Adventurers Guild to finalize the paperwork for the upcoming escort mission. The receptionist, Alina, pulled them into a private room with a look of pure confusion. She showed them the contract, which listed their party name as Moonlight Bunny. Miyabi liked the name, but Alina pointed out the real problem. Liz, a C-rank adventurer, had been named the leader of the entire unit, ranking her above a team of veteran A-rankers. To make matters weirder, Miyabi had a glowing recommendation from Weiss the blacksmith, which was so prestigious the guild master was currently out apologizing to people for not knowing Miyabi was someone important. Alina warned Miyabi that Weiss was a national icon and that having his backing was a massive deal. The biggest mystery remained: why would elite A-rankers let a C-rank girl lead them? Liz finally cracked under the pressure and explained the embarrassing truth. The A-rank team, Red Cliff, were old friends of her late father. They weren't following her because of her skill, they were obsessed with protecting her. Liz groaned, realizing the entire week-long mission wasn't going to be a serious job, but a week of being pampered by a group of overprotective uncles. As Liz calmed down, Alina served them tea, and the conversation turned to Liz's father. It turned out he was a well-loved C-rank adventurer who had saved many lives. One of the groups he rescued 8 years ago was Red Cliff, the elite A-rank team joining them on this mission. Back then, after her father passed, they tried to pay Liz back with overwhelming, borderline creepy affection, trying to buy her a house, standing guard while she slept, and gifting her new clothes every single day. They were less like mentors and more like obsessive fans. It got so bad that Weiss had to step in and scold them into backing off. Miyabi realized this mission was likely a trap set by Lord Torrance to test Liz's leadership. If she failed or felt overwhelmed, the overprotective A-rankers would probably try to force her to quit dangerous solo work and join their party instead for her own safety. To make matters more awkward, Alina pointed out that to any outsider, Miyabi and Liz looked like a couple about to get married, especially since they were living together in a house Miyabi built. Liz turned bright red as she realized how many couple-like things they had already done. Like her giving him her laundry to enchant or him waking her up in the morning. Miyabi wasn't worried, though. He spent the next few days preparing by helping Weiss at the fort. In exchange for some rare mithril ore, Miyabi blasted through a massive backlog of enchantment work that Weiss's apprentices couldn't handle. While working, Weiss admitted he was staying neutral in the Red Cliff situation, but he gave Miyabi a silent thumbs up to teach them a lesson if they got out of hand. Miyabi planned to do exactly that by showing them what a truly high-level supporter could do. He wanted to make the trip so comfortable for Lady Chiffon that the A-rankers would look useless in comparison. On the day of departure, everyone gathered at the North Gate in the freezing morning cold. Lord Torrance and his daughter Chiffon were there, along with a serious-looking head maid named Alicia. While the soldiers were shivering in the frost, Liz stood tall and professional, taking charge as the unit leader. Miyabi immediately showed off his cheat skills by effortlessly storing all of Chiffon's heavy luggage, 5 large suitcases, and the maid's gear into his bottomless magical inventory. Lord Torrance looked a bit protective seeing a young man handle his daughter's personal belongings, but Miyabi reassured him that he was strictly professional. With the bags packed and the team assembled, the week-long journey to the Royal Academy finally began. Mel arrived at the meeting spot looking more asleep than awake, clutching her bags. Since Miyabi was the team's support specialist, he tucked her luggage into his magical inventory and handed her a sleep-tight kit basically a set of his super comfy heat-enchanted cushions. Mel's eyes lit up at the magma cushions, and she happily crawled into the carriage to nap. As a cat beastman, she's nocturnal, so her job was to handle the night watch once they reached camp. Just as they were ready to leave, the rank party Redcliffe showed up. They were 4 veterans who had been close friends with Liz's late father. There was Dort, the dual-sword leader. Gilbert, a magic user who thought he looked cool but just looked old. Laura, an archer who looked suspiciously young for her age, and Tyson, a big guy in heavy armor. They clearly didn't trust Miyabi, staring him down like overprotective fathers looking at a guy dating their daughter. They even tried to intimidate him by dropping massive, heavy bags for him to carry, hoping he'd struggle. Instead, Miyabi sucked everything into his infinite inventory without blinking, leaving them staring in total shock. As the journey began, the A-rankers realized they were almost useless. Liz was a pro at leading, using silent hand signals to guide the carriage and spotting monsters long before they became a threat. Whenever the road got bumpy or muddy from rain, Miyabi would run ahead with a shovel, instantly fixing the path so the carriage never even had to slow down. The elite guards were left walking in circles with nothing to do, looking completely stunned by how smooth the trip was going. When they stopped for lunch, Miyabi pulled out a massive wooden floor, a dining table and chairs. He served hot cream stew and milk bread he'd prepped at home. Dort tried to demand an explanation for why a supporter was carrying a whole restaurant in his pocket, but Miyabi just ignored the attitude and politely offered them seats. The food was so good that the grumpy A-rankers forgot they were supposed to be tough and started asking for seconds. Even the noble Chiffon and her maid Alicia were won over, realizing this was the most luxury they'd ever experienced on the road. By late afternoon, the weather turned nasty. Dort warned Liz that the sky was about to dump rain and snow, thinking he'd finally caught her in a mistake for not stopping earlier. But Liz just looked at Miyabi and said, "Bring out the houses." Suddenly, 3 small, fully furnished wooden houses complete with heating enchantments and a stable for the horses slammed down onto the grass. Dort officially lost his mind. He started yelling that you can't just carry houses around, but Liz and Chiffon just ignored his tantrum and walked into the warm building. While the A-rankers stood outside in the rain, frozen in disbelief, Miyabi was inside serving more hot soup and snacks. Eventually, Liz had to yell at the veterans to stop standing in the rain like idiots and go to bed. By the end of day 1, the elite guards realized they weren't there to protect Liz, they were just guests in Miyabi's portable 5-star hotel. On the second day of the mission, heavy rain turned the roads into a mess, forcing the group to stay put. Even inside the cozy, magic-heated house Miyabi built, the mood was a bit stiff. The elite A-rankers Redcliffe had completely overslept on Miyabi's ultra-comfy beds, failing to wake up even when he knocked. This left Liz to handle the guard duty alone in the cold. Alicia, the Lord's head maid, was so ashamed of oversleeping that she apologized to Miyabi with tears in her eyes, looking disheveled in her pajamas. Miyabi felt bad. He realized he'd made the beds too comfortable, accidentally breaking the team's discipline. To make it up to her, he decided to craft some special heat-enchanted gloves and socks for her later. When Liz saw Alicia running away blushing, she teased Miyabi about making the maid cry, but he quickly smoothed things over. By afternoon, the rain slowed down and the group gathered for a study session. Liz surprised everyone by acting as a tutor, teaching Lady Chiffon and Alicia complex magic theory that went way over Miyabi's head. While they studied, the 4 A-rankers finally crawled out of bed, looking incredibly embarrassed. They apologized profusely, and since everyone there had experienced the trap of Miyabi's luxury beds, no one really stayed mad. To warm everyone up, Miyabi served a legendary cheat meal, rich pork ramen. The smell of the thick broth and tender meat completely broke the A-rankers' serious faces. They started inhaling the food like they'd never eaten before, calling it the ultimate masterpiece. Even the noble Chiffon and Alicia couldn't resist asking for extra helpings. On the 3rd morning, Alicia was so determined not to oversleep that she slept on the floor, thinking it would be less comfortable, but even the floor was warm thanks to Miyabi's magic. Meanwhile, the A-rankers overslept again and got an earful from Liz. Before heading out, Miyabi gave Alicia and Chiffon the heated gloves and socks he'd made. Alicia was deeply moved that an adventurer would care so much about a maid's comfort, and Miyabi's reputation with the ladies skyrocketed. As they hit the road, the mud made traveling nearly impossible for a normal carriage. Miyabi became a one-man construction crew, using his shovel and skills to instantly fix every pothole and puddle. The A-rankers could only watch in awe, calling him a stamina scooper because he never seemed to get tired. During a break, they ran into a group of 20 stranded travelers whose food had been ruined by the rain. The atmosphere was grim. While it's risky for nobles to give away supplies on the road, Liz wanted to help. The Redcliffe veterans stepped up, showing their professional side for once. They apologized to Miyabi for their earlier attitude and suggested using the backup rations they'd brought. The A-rankers took charge, identifying themselves to the travelers to put them at ease and distributing the food. To help out, Miyabi provided dry firewood and hot milk for the children. The travelers were so grateful they started crying, and the tension of the trip melted away. Miyabi even used the moment to trick Alicia into promising she'd sleep in a real bed again as long as he promised to downgrade the comfort slightly so she wouldn't miss her alarm. By the time they were ready to move on, the group felt like a real team for the first time. After finishing dinner, the 4 members of the A-rank party, Red Cliff, pulled Miyabi aside to apologize. It turned out their overprotective behavior was actually a series of failed attempts to mess with him. Dort admitted they had packed way too much luggage just to stress Miyabi out, and they had even included broken weapons, hoping he'd fail to fix them. They even brought cheese as a survival food, specifically because they thought Liz still hated fish and loved cheese information that was years out of date. Miyabi saw right through their plan. They wanted to make Liz struggle as a leader so she'd give up on her current party and join them for safety. However, because Miyabi had fixed everything and provided a luxury home, their plan backfired completely. The veterans were so embarrassed and impressed by Miyabi's skills that they did a total 180. Instead of trying to break the pair up, they suddenly decided Miyabi was the perfect man for Liz. They started cheering, calling him their son, and demanding he make Liz happy forever. Miyabi tried to ask for actual money as compensation for the trouble, but the veterans were too busy celebrating a marriage that wasn't even happening. With the A-rankers now acting like Miyabi's biggest fans, the rest of the trip to the Royal Academy was a breeze. The veterans followed Liz's orders like loyal servants, and Miyabi kept the roads perfectly maintained. When they finally reached the capital, they arrived at a massive, high-end magic academy where only the elite and royalty study. Liz was buzzing with excitement, geeking out over the famous magic training facilities and library books she had only ever heard of. While the Red Cliff veterans went to the guild to file the mission report, Miyabi, Liz and Mel accompanied Lady Chiffon and her maid, Alicia, to the girls' dormitory. Since Miyabi had a special permit and was carrying all the heavy luggage in his magical inventory, he was allowed inside, a rare move for a guy. Inside Chiffon's room, Liz immediately lost her mind over the rare magic books on the shelves, while Mel bluntly asked when they could play with stuffed animals again. Chiffon explained that being a high-ranking noble is actually a struggle. She has to maintain a C-rank combat level and study land management just to keep her title. She often falls. Miyabi spent the afternoon finishing a massive teddy bear for Chiffon, using up his leftover wool. She hugged it instantly, loving the warmth from the fire enchantment he'd hidden inside. Mel wanted one too, but since Miyabi was out of materials and she lived in a cramped inn, he told her to just share Chiffon's for now. While the girls played, Alicia, the head maid, approached Miyabi with a mountain of laundry. She asked him to enchant Chiffon's camisole, socks, and even waist warmers with his heating magic. Miyabi was hesitant, worried Lord Torrance would kill him for touching his daughter's clothes, but Alicia insisted. She explained that noble dresses are freezing in winter, and Chiffon often shivers so much she can't focus on her studies. Miyabi realized how hard the two worked, Chiffon studying late and Alicia staying up even later to look after her. He agreed to enchant everything, and even offered to upgrade their carpets and cushions into heated versions that looked like high-end noble decor. Alicia then shyly pulled out her own clothes, asking for the same treatment. She admitted it felt a bit improper, but she was desperate for the warmth. Miyabi joked that he felt like a doting dad, and Alicia giggled, saying the dad title actually suited him perfectly. By sunset, Miyabi finished the work and replaced the dormitory beds with his high-end enchanted versions. As he and Liz prepared to leave the academy, Alicia handed him a thick envelope from Chiffon to give to Lord Torrance. It was a long, heartfelt letter about the trip and her new friends. Before they parted, they settled a naming dispute for the teddy bear. Mel wanted Suzumu, Chiffon wanted Bear Loose, so they compromised on the very weird name Bear Loose Suzumu. Miyabi and Liz spent one last night in the capital at a luxury inn provided by the Lord. Even though it was a world-class hotel built by Vice the blacksmith, Liz complained that the beds felt stiff and the baths felt empty compared to Miyabi's house. She realized Miyabi's temporary base had ruined her taste for normal luxury. They decided to head home early the next morning, skipping the capital's sights because they both missed their cozy home. The week-long walk back to their city was easy since Miyabi had already cleared and leveled the roads on the way there. They wore their full set of warmth gear, neck warmers, wristbands, and earmuffs. Liz had a minor crisis because she wore too many layers and started sweating, proving that Miyabi's gear was actually too effective for a hike. When they finally reached the city gates, they bumped into Eleonora, the guild receptionist. She was surprised to see them back so soon and worried something had gone wrong. Liz reassured her the mission was a success, but mentioned the A-rankers, Red Cliff, had gone a bit overprotective. Eleonora was on her way to the Lord's mansion to discuss disaster prep, so the duo joined her. She noticed their weird earmuffs and neck warmers, and Liz warned her that once you start using Miyabi's inventions, your sense of normal is gone forever. Eleanor sighed, joking that as long as Miyabi was in town, her job of writing reports on impossible things would never end. Miyabi just smiled, knowing he was about to make her job even harder with the news he was bringing to the Lord. Miyabi and Liz followed Eleanor to the Lord's mansion, where they found Chiffon's father, Trent's, waiting. The room was tense at first. Trent seemed worried about his daughter and a bit annoyed by the unannounced visit. But as soon as Miyabi handed over Chiffon's thick letter, the mood shifted. As Trent read, his serious face broke into a smile. He realized Miyabi hadn't just guarded his daughter, he'd basically revolutionized her life with his crafts. He even joked that he deserved a pat on the back for hiring Miyabi in the first place. Eleanor was totally lost until Miyabi accidentally let it slip that he'd also repaired the Lord's private bath. This hit a nerve because Miyabi was supposed to report important stuff like that to the guild. Liz tried to stay out of it, but Miyabi dragged her down with him, mentioning she was there too. They ended up bickering like kids, accidentally revealing that Weiss, a legendary blacksmith, had actually failed a repair job that Miyabi fixed. This made Eleanor even more stressed, and she promised they'd both be getting a long lecture at the guild later. To smooth things over, Trent showed Eleanor the letter. She could barely believe what she was reading, thinking it sounded more like a fairy tale than a report. To prove it was real, Miyabi pulled out a warming cushion he'd enchanted. Trent was amazed by how warm it was, noting it would be a lifesaver for long, freezing carriage rides. Seeing Eleanor still looking skeptical, Liz put a magical neck warmer on her. Once Eleanor felt the heat for herself, she went quiet, realizing Miyabi's inventions were so game-changing they might actually cause political trouble. Trent decided to cancel his official meeting, with Eleanor to focus on Miyabi's new tech. He told Miyabi to head over to Weiss's blacksmith shop to explain how he was adding magic to weapons, warning him that if he didn't, Weiss would probably get grumpy and force him into more manual labor. Miyabi took the hint and bolted, leaving Liz behind to finish the report. When Miyabi reached the shop, he found Weiss in a shouting match with 3 high-ranking elders. One old man with long white hair seemed particularly stubborn, and they left after a heated argument about things staying the same for 9 years. Once they were gone, Miyabi showed Weiss some throwing knives he'd enchanted with wind and earth magic. Weiss, a master who can usually read any weapon just by looking at it, was stumped. He couldn't understand how Miyabi was changing the actual nature of the metal. They got into a debate about furniture, and Weiss, who takes huge pride in his beds, challenged Miyabi to a bed-off. Miyabi accepted, and the second Weiss laid down on Miyabi's enchanted bed. He admitted defeat and bought it on the spot for 200 gold coins, about 2 million yen. Weiss then tried to learn the warming enchantment himself. He spent 2 hours struggling just to get the magic into a simple seat cushion. Because his mana control wasn't as precise as Miyabi's, the cushion ended up bursting into flame. Weiss realized that this simple craft actually required insane skill that most professionals couldn't dream of. He told Miyabi that if they priced the cushions based on how hard they were to make, they'd cost more than the luxury bed. Miyabi didn't want to rip people off, so he agreed to spend the next few days at the shop teaching Weiss the technique, adding another massive favor to the long list of things the legendary blacksmith owed him. The next morning, Miyabi and Liz headed to the blacksmith shop. Liz was clearly excited to see Weiss, the legendary blacksmith who had basically raised her. When they arrived, they found Weiss waiting with a shy girl named Karen. She was about Liz's age with a blue bob cut, and she was so socially awkward that she practically vibrated with nerves. Liz ran over to say hi, but Karen was so flustered she could barely speak, even though they'd just grabbed dinner 3 months ago. Karen immediately bowed to Miyabi and called him master, even though they had never met. Weiss explained that Karen was a talented enchanter who worked at the production guild's warehouse. After hearing about Miyabi's insane skills the day before, she was desperate to learn from him. Weiss vouched for her, saying she was as good as him at enchanting but too shy for her own good. Miyabi agreed to teach her, though he warned that even Weiss struggled with this technique. Karen remained stiff as a board, insisting on calling him master no matter how much he tried to get her to be casual. It turned out Karen and Liz were old roommates from when they both stayed with Weiss. Miyabi realized Weiss had been giving Karen tough enchanting jobs for years to try and help her build confidence, but it hadn't really worked. Now, Weiss had even forced her to take a break from her warehouse job to train here. When Karen realized she was being groomed to handle the shop's difficult enchanting work so Weiss could relax, she panicked, but Miyabi just saw it as a win. If Karen got good, he wouldn't have to do the work himself. They got to training in the back of the shop. Miyabi watched Weiss and Karen practice on wooden blocks, giving them pointers. Weiss was trying to use brute force, which didn't work for delicate magic. Miyabi told him to relax, noting that even Weiss's other students worked with too much tension. Weiss sighed, realizing he had to unlearn decades of bad habits. Meanwhile, Karen was actually a natural. She could see the fibers of the material clearly, but she was so scared of making a mistake that she moved at a snail's pace. Miyabi encouraged her to be messy and just get used to the flow. Miyabi started wondering why they were struggling so much. For him, it felt easy, but he realized his mana manipulation skill from his past life was likely acting like a cheat code, guiding his magic automatically. To help them, he started tracing a path of light magic through the wood for them to follow. This helped Weiss immediately, as it gave him a roadmap for his mana. Weiss admitted that trying to do this without a guide was like trying to thread a needle in the dark. After hours of practice, everyone was exhausted. Karen was slumped in a chair, drained of mana, and Weiss was frustrated by the steep learning curve. Liz, who had been quietly watching, suddenly asked Miyabi if he could use regular combat magic. Miyabi admitted he had zero talent for it. Liz explained that in this world, magic for fighting and enchanting for crafting are usually totally different things, and people rarely excel at both. She suggested that since Miyabi was essentially putting fighting magic into objects, he should try using the laws of magic theory. She brought up some old famous mages and their theories about element. Fire should flow from the bottom up like a flame, water should flow top to bottom like a river, and wind should move sideways. Miyabi tried it out on a block, following the natural flow of fire, and was shocked at how much easier the mana moved. It felt like the material was finally cooperating. He was genuinely impressed, realizing that even in this world of crafting, a little bit of old-school magic theory went a long way. Miyabi and Liz teamed up to teach the legendary blacksmith Weiss and his shy student Karen the art of enchanting. Liz took charge of Weiss, scolding him like a daughter whenever he tried to use brute force. She explained that magic needs to flow gently, and being too aggressive just creates a mess. Meanwhile, Miyabi worked with Karen, who was proving to be a natural. She managed to soak a wooden block with magic perfectly, but Miyabi had to stop her before it exploded from being overpowered. He joked that unless she wanted to burn the shop down, she needed to dial it back. To show Karen how dangerous enchanting could be, Miyabi pulled out a stone block he'd worked on. It looked normal but was so hot it turned water into steam instantly. He warned her that with flammable materials like cloth or wood, using too much mana would cause an immediate fire. While Karen panicked, Weiss was getting roasted by Liz across the room. She teased him for falling behind his own student, which made the old dwarf grumpy. He snapped that he didn't hate enchanting, he just hated how difficult it was. Seeing Weiss reach his breaking point, Liz signaled Miyabi to step in with a peace offering, food. Miyabi used his craft skill to whip up a massive hot pot, Yos Nabe, in seconds. The smell of meat and veggies in a savory broth instantly flipped Weiss's mood from angry to overjoyed. He and Liz dug in, acting like a real family, while Karen was blown away that Miyabi could craft a gourmet meal instantly. She'd never seen a cooking version of a workbench before and started eating with tears of joy, moved by how delicious the soup was. As they ate, Weiss noticed a heated block Miyabi had placed under the pot to keep it warm. Miyabi casually mentioned his entire base was built with these self-heating blocks. Weiss realized that while he was a master blacksmith, this specific magic crafting was something only a crafter class could truly master. Despite the difficulty, Weiss refused to quit. He wanted to leave behind legendary weapons that used this technology, even if it meant learning from people half his age. Touched by his dedication, Miyabi and Liz agreed to stick with him until he got it. The lunch ended with a hilarious battle over the last of the noodles, which Weiss claimed for himself. A week later, Karen finally succeeded in making a self-warming seat cushion. She gifted it to Weiss, who was so moved by his student's success that he actually broke down in tears. With the shop finally in a good mood, Miyabi headed to the Adventurers Guild to give Alina an update. He tried to play it cool, but Alina nearly fainted when she heard Weiss had offered Miyabi 6 months' worth of shop profits as a reward. She realized the simple warming cushions she was currently using were actually high-luxury items that could break the economy. Miyabi tried to downplay it, mentioning he'd already made a decent amount of money by selling Weiss a magical bed for 200 gold coins. Hearing about such massive sums of money being tossed around casually was the final straw for Alina. She looked like she was about to cry from the stress of all the paperwork and political chaos Miyabi was causing. Realizing he'd accidentally dropped another bombshell, Miyabi was dragged into a private room for a very long, very serious talk about his total lack of common sense. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Alina dragged Miyabi into a private room for a serious interrogation. He tried to play down his connection with Weiss, knowing that if he mentioned how much Liz had been teasing the legendary blacksmith, they might both get kicked out of the guild. He also casually mentioned selling 2 more magical beds to the Lord for 400 gold coins. Alina looked like she was losing her mind, her common sense finally snapping. She begged him to stop acting like a traveling salesman, especially since normal people can't just walk into a lord's mansion whenever they feel like it. Miyabi admitted he felt bad for causing her so much stress, but Alina sighed and told him she just wanted to keep a close eye on him because he was a magnet for trouble. She joked that every time they met, her heart started racing, not from love but from the pure thrill of wondering what disaster he'd caused this time. Miyabi tried to act cool, telling her he didn't want to cause problems since he'd just rented land to build a house, but a leaner dropped a bombshell. The guild headquarters was already watching them. Because Liz and Miyabi were rising so fast, the higher-ups wanted to break up their party and force them into separate elite groups, Liz for her talent and Miyabi for his money-making potential. Alina had been working overtime writing reports to prove they were better off together, acting like a protective big sister. Miyabi realized she was shielding them from guild politics without asking for anything in return. He offered to do something nice for her as a thank you, and she smiled, asking for a nice dinner with her little sister, Liz, once the current monster disaster planning was over. Miyabi promised to give her a VIP experience she'd never forget. After leaving the guild, Miyabi met up with Karen, the shy enchanter, and took her to his temporary base to discuss the pricing for their magic crafts. Since Weiss was busy practicing, Miyabi figured Karen's input as a professional enchanter would be perfect. When they arrived at the base, Karen was so overwhelmed by the sight of the guards at the Lord's area that she literally clung to Miyabi's arm in a panic. He had to gently pry her off, telling her the guards were just doing their jobs. The moment they stepped inside, Karen froze. The enchanted warmth of the house felt like stepping into another world. She was even more blown away when Miyabi handed her a pair of custom slippers he designed with a Moonlight Rabbit logo to match their party name. She started bouncing on the sofa like a kid, amazed that a temporary base felt more luxurious than a noble's mansion. She told Miyabi that in the production guild, making furniture this high quality was considered impossible for a crafter. Miyabi realized he needed to see how a normal crafter worked, so he took Karen to his workshop and asked her to make something. Nervous but determined, Karen used her magic to turn some pink yarn into a pair of mittens. The result was a bit of a mess. One mitten had a hole, the shape was sagging, and the patterns were crooked. Karen was thrilled, thinking she'd done a great job, which made Miyabi realize just how much his cheat skills were carrying him. In this world, most crafts came out low quality and needed tons of manual fixing. To show her the potential of the class, Miyabi grabbed some white and blue yarn, visualized a perfect design, and activated his skill. In a flash, a high-quality, professional-grade sweater appeared in his hands, featuring a perfect snowflake pattern. Karen's jaw hit the floor. She screamed that what he just did wasn't even a craft skill anymore, it was a miracle. Sitting in his workshop, Miyabi watched Karen work. She was still feeling down after seeing his miracle crafting, so she was manually fixing the messy mittens she'd made earlier. Miyabi noticed that even though her initial craft failed, her hands moved with incredible skill while fixing them. Karen explained that for a normal crafter, manual fixing is mandatory. Items like gloves never come out the same size otherwise. Miyabi realized that because she'd spent years fixing bad crafts, her manual dexterity was actually better than his. She admitted that even with all that effort, crafters were looked down upon because their furniture wasn't as good as a blacksmith, and people assumed their jobs were easy since they didn't involve heavy lifting. Miyabi asked if she was struggling for money, but Karen shyly revealed a pile of sparkling gemstones. She confessed she had a massive crush on jewelry and had been buying gems to study how they shine under magic. However, she'd never actually made a piece of jewelry because every time she tried to process a gem, it shattered. Miyabi realized the problem immediately. In this world, certain high-end materials require a specific protection technique that most crafters don't know. He told her that if she treated the gem like glass and infused it with neutral mana first, it wouldn't break. To prove it, Miyabi fired up a furnace, something Karen noted most crafters don't even own. He grabbed some sand, turned it into a block of glass, and then moved with blurring speed. Using a technique from his past life called the brilliant cut, he carved the glass into a perfect 58-faceted diamond shape that sparkled like a real gem. Karen's jaw dropped as she watched him work at a speed that shouldn't be humanly possible. Miyabi gave her a smug grin and invited her to practice the technique with him. 2 weeks later, Karen had basically become Miyabi's full-time apprentice. The world outside was buried under a massive blanket of snow, turning everything silver. Inside their magically warmed base, things were cozy, but Liz, who had been sensitive to the cold her whole life, was dying to play in the snow now that she had Miyabi's warming gear. She shyly challenged Miyabi to a snowball fight. Miyabi tried to act like a mature adult, but his competitive side took over and he jumped into the fray. The fight turned intense fast. Liz was cheating by using wind magic to launch snowballs like a pitching machine, while Miyabi was using his block skill to build instant walls for cover. Karen joined in, acting as the supply runner by gathering snow from all over the city into her inventory and dumping it in their yard. Miyabi noticed Karen's inventory had grown significantly by practicing glass making in the furnace. She'd finally broken past her level cap and and was now leveling up her gathering skill. Eventually, they switched to building a snowman. Miyabi and Liz rolled giant snowballs together, feeling like kids again. Just as they finished a snowman near the entrance of their property, a guest arrived, Alina, the guild receptionist. She was off duty and looking for a break from the freezing weather. Miyabi had invited her over for a VIP dinner as a thank you for her help. Liz was so happy to see her big sister that she immediately hugged her and dragged her toward the house. Alina was already losing her mind because Miyabi's yard had zero snow on it. The heat from the house was melting it instantly. She screamed in confusion as Liz pulled her toward a luxury bath that definitely shouldn't exist in a temporary base. After the bath, Alina emerged looking refreshed but still totally dazed by the luxury. Miyabi had prepared a shabu-shabu feast with high-quality black oak meat. Karen was so nervous to meet a famous guild official that she could barely speak, but the tension melted once the food started cooking. Liz, a self-proclaimed sesame sauce fanatic, started devouring the meat with a look of pure bliss. Alina tried to maintain her professional sanity, pointing out that there were literally trees growing inside the bathroom, but Liz told her to just stop thinking and eat. One bite of the meat dipped in rich sesame sauce was all it took. Alina's brain short-circuited from the deliciousness, and she officially gave up on trying to make sense of Miyabi's world. Meanwhile, Karen was so shy she didn't know when to put her meat in the pot, so Miyabi had to play dad and cook for her. Seeing how much Alina was enjoying herself, Liz started acting out like a little kid, stuffing her face and getting sauce on her cheeks just so Alina would notice her. Alina naturally slipped into a mom role, gently wiping Liz's face with a towel. Miyabi watched the scene play out, feeling like he was presiding over a weird, cozy family dinner in the middle of a winter wonderland. After lunch, Alina changed into a magical tracksuit Miyabi had made and headed out to play in the snow with Liz. Even though Alina used to be an adventurer, her desk job had made her soft, and she was quickly exhausted trying to keep up with Liz's endless energy. 2 hours later, after finishing a massive snowman, a shivering Alina collapsed onto the sofa back at the base. Miyabi handed her some warm tea, noting that Liz seemed happier and more open since they started partying together. Alina agreed, mentioning that Liz used to be a lonely solo adventurer who always looked like she was about to cry when saying goodbye after dinner. Miyabi realized that providing a home, even a temporary one, had truly changed Liz's life. That evening, over a hot meal, the group sat down to tackle a serious problem: pricing. Karen, Miyabi's shy apprentice, had started making high-quality enchanted undershirts that kept the wearer incredibly warm. However, Karen was terrified of overcharging, fearing people would be angry if a lowly crafter asked for a high price. Miyabi turned to Alina for a professional opinion. Alina looked at the shirt and dropped a truth bomb. In a freezing city with no central heating, a noblewoman would easily pay 3 gold coins, about 30,000 yen for one. Karen nearly fainted at the idea of making 60,000 yen an hour, but Alina explained that for people sitting in freezing offices or carriages, these clothes weren't just fashion, they were survival. They eventually settled on a fair price of 1 to 2 gold coins. To give Karen a boost of confidence, Alina offered to buy the stock right then and there. Panicking but excited, Karen accidentally pulled out a massive mountain of shirts from her inventory, earning her the nickname Undershirt Queen from Miyabi. A few days later, the snow cleared enough for adventurers to head back out. Miyabi and Liz watched as low-ranking adventurers carried supplies to those stranded by the storm. Liz suggested they skip the rescue missions to let the rookies earn some money and experience. Instead, they headed over to Weiss's blacksmith shop. They found the legendary dwarf in a rare moment of pure professional focus, though he quickly ruined the vibe by joking that Miyabi's face looked like a bowl of noodle. Weiss admitted that while he'd learned the warming enchantment, he couldn't do the delicate work Miyabi and Karen did. His mana was too heavy, better suited for high-tier combat weapons than soft clothing. He revealed that he was now wearing one of Karen's enchanted shirts, as were all his disciples. It was clear that Karen had officially graduated from being a shy warehouse worker to a master crafter. However, the heartwarming moment took a sharp turn when Weiss took a good look at Liz. He bluntly pointed out that since she'd been staying with Miyabi and eating his gourmet cooking, her face had gotten noticeably rounder. Liz froze in shock as the dad who raised her accidentally landed a critical hit on her feelings, making her realize that luxury living had come with a bit of extra weight. After Weiss pointed out she was getting a bit chubby from his gourmet cooking, Liz was devastated. She finished her lunch in a hurry and declared that she couldn't stop now if she wanted to reach A-rank. While she sounded professional, it was obvious she just wanted to burn off the luxury life weight before it became a permanent problem. Miyabi knew better than to mention her weight. That was a social landmine he wasn't about to step on, so he just agreed to go on a quest with her to help her exercise. At the Adventurers Guild, they found an emergency request to take down a flock of 30 snowbirds on the northern highway. The pay was 20 gold coins, which was low for an emergency, meaning the birds weren't that dangerous. Liz ripped the paper off the board and dragged Miyabi to Aliner's counter. Aliner warned them that the guild usually recommends a 4-person party with mages and archers for flying monsters. But Liz insisted they'd be fine because she had Miyabi. Miyabi tried to remind her that he was a non-combat supporter who couldn't hit a bird with a knife to save his life, but Liz was already set on the mission. Aliner gave them a look that said she knew exactly what they were up to. She had previously warned them that they needed to build up a solid track record so the guild wouldn't force them to split up. Since they had been slacking off in their cozy house, she expected them to take on tougher jobs soon. She suggested they go to the forest tomorrow for a real challenge, and while Liz hated forest combat because trees messed with her magic, she was too intimidated by Aliner's smile to say no. An hour later, they reached the northern highway. The sky was filled with white birds about 2 feet long, swirling around and making it snow to mark their territory. Miyabi noticed there were way more than 30. The flock had likely merged with another group, doubling the numbers. Liz stepped up, telling Miyabi to stay back. She launched a massive wave of ice needles, knocking down about 30% of the flock in one go. As the remaining birds dove at them like white bullets, Miyabi pulled out his shovel. "Huge earth block, go!" he shouted, slamming a massive stone wall into existence. The birds smashed into the wall with sickening thuds, falling to the ground like ripe fruit. When the birds tried to fly around the obstacle, Liz was waiting. She picked them off one by one with more ice magic, looking like she was playing a high-stakes shooting game. Once the sky was clear, Liz sighed, feeling like she was getting weaker, because Miyabi made the fight too easy. She missed the days when she had to fight for her life at close range, but Miyabi pointed out that having a partner to cover her was just how a real party worked. While she moped about her skills, Miyabi got to work stuffing the bird carcasses into his inventory, thinking about all the high-quality feathers and meat they just scored. A week later, the duo had become a legend at the guild, but not for their combat. Every time they returned from an oak hunt, the receptionists would yell, "The meat prince is here," and the butchering team would rush out. Because of the heavy snow, meat prices were skyrocketing everywhere else, but Miyabi was flooding the local market with so much cheap, high-quality meat that the whole city was having a feast. The guild officially promoted Miyabi to C rank on the spot for his massive contribution to the city's food supply. Liz was a bit salty that Miyabi reached C rank in 2 months while it took her 2 years, but Aliner cheered her up by revealing that Liz was already close to hitting B rank. Because they were taking on high-level missions and finishing them at record speeds, the guild's higher-ups were starting to see them as an elite duo. Just as they were celebrating, Aliner told them a noble was waiting in the private lounge with a massive job that would guarantee Liz's promotion. They walked into the room and were relieved to see the lord's daughter, Chiffon, and her maid, Alicia. Since they had lived together during the trip to the academy, the formal tension vanished instantly. Liz actually flopped onto the floor in relief, while Miyabi had to play dad and help her back into a chair. After some small talk about magic school, the mood turned serious. Chiffon explained that a massive avalanche had buried the mountain pass to the west, cutting off a major trade route to the capital. The Royal Knights couldn't clear it because the road itself was crumbling. If they moved the debris, the whole mountain would slide. They needed a specialist. Chiffon had heard from Liz that Miyabi wasn't just a crafter but a pioneer who could move earth and build structures in seconds. Miyabi was suspicious. A national disaster like this usually involved the king and the army, not a teenage noble girl. He asked who the real client was. Just then, the door opened, and a group of knights walked in, led by a handsome, blonde young man. Chiffon introduced him as Prince Krez, the third prince of the kingdom, and her fiancé. Miyabi's head started to spin at the thought of working for royalty, but Liz jumped up and pointed at the prince in total shock. "Wait, Krez. You're a prince?" It turned out the prince was another one of the kids who had grown up hanging out at Weiss's blacksmith shop. The elite mission to save the kingdom's trade route was basically a reunion of childhood friends. The tension in the meeting room vanished instantly when Krez, the third prince, started chatting like an old friend with Liz. It turned out they were childhood buddies who grew up together under Weiss's care. Liz was her usual blunt self, even joking about how she didn't believe him when he first said he was royalty. While the knights stood guard and Chiffon, the lord's daughter and Krez's fiancé, watched on, the narrator worried Liz might get in trouble for being so casual. Krez laughed it off, explaining that since he'd given up his right to the throne and Chiffon was the future ruler, he was basically a commoner now. Plus, as a crafter, he wasn't exactly high-ranking in the eyes of the elite. Chiffon got down to business, explaining that the new king, Krez's brother, wanted the young couple to handle this disaster to build their reputation. Usually they'd hire Weiss, but they didn't want to overwork the old man in the cold. However, the real issue was much darker. Chiffon handed over a secret document from the production guild. It revealed that the guild was using the avalanche as an excuse to stop all road and wall repairs. their true goal: to kick out every crafter in the guild. This was a repeat of an old grudge from 9 years ago where high-level smiths tried to wipe out crafters, and only Vice and a young Cress had managed to stop them back then. Cress had already talked to Vice, who agreed to let the narrator take over the official request. Vice's message was simple: do whatever you want, I'll take the heat. This gave the narrator a green light to ignore the rule. He also realized the mountain they were heading to was once a mine. While most people forgot about it, the narrator's knowledge told him one thing: it was likely a source of mithril. He grinned, realizing this rescue mission was actually a chance to strike it rich. The next morning, the group set out. Karen joined them and was losing her mind after finding out her old friend Cress was actually a prince. The knights were still skeptical, doubting that a kid like the narrator could fix a national disaster without Vice's help. Meanwhile, Chiffon's maid, Alicia, acting on her lady's orders, shyly asked the narrator to sit with her at the front of the carriage. It was a tight squeeze, and she was clearly nervous, but the narrator played it cool to keep her at ease. As they headed toward the blocked pass, the narrator prepared to show the doubters exactly what a crafter could do and maybe pocket some rare ore along the way. As Alicia got used to driving the carriage, she finally relaxed and started talking about Prince Cress. She explained that 9 years ago, when Cress was just 7, the production guild first tried to kick out all crafters. Even though he was just a kid, Cress stepped up. He gave up his right to the throne and even broke off his engagement to Chiffon because he believed he was the only one who could stop the guild. He went out in front of the public, admitted he was born with the useless crafter class, and promised to protect the kingdom by making people's lives better rather than fighting. The people loved him for it, and the guild was forced to back down because they couldn't kick out a beloved prince. However, things changed when Cress went to magic school. Rumors started spreading that he was a failure who only stayed relevant by clinging to Chiffon. It was pretty obvious the production guild started those rumors to ruin his reputation and finally get rid of crafters for good. Now, with the mountain pass blocked by the avalanche, the guild is using it as the perfect excuse to finish the job. If this mission fails, Cress will lose everything, and his engagement to Chiffon will likely be over for good. Hearing this, the narrator decided he'd go all out to help the couple stay together. That night, the group set up camp. The narrator pulled his comfy house out of his magic storage, which blew the minds of the knights. Even Mel, the catgirl guard, was already inside cuddling a giant teddy bear the narrator had made. While everyone ate stew, the narrator helped Karen practice her gem cutting. She was struggling to flow her mana into the glass without breaking it. Suddenly, Cress chimed in with some super technical advice about molecular bonding. The narrator was stunned. Liz had always said crafters couldn't use magic, but Cress picked up a piece of glass and flowed mana into it perfectly in seconds. It turned out Cress had been teaching himself enchantment magic for years. He realized that crafters actually handle mana differently than blacksmiths, and he had even surpassed their master Vice in this specific area. Cress admitted he didn't go public with this discovery because he didn't want crafters to become slaves to the production guild. He wanted a better future for them. Cress looked the narrator in the eye and asked if he could ever become as skilled as him, mentioning he had someone he truly wanted to make happy. The narrator realized the prince was a total romantic, but told him he'd have to work like crazy if he wanted to beat Karen. The two disciples started bickering and practicing together, and the atmosphere felt like a group of old friends. With a week left until they reached the capital, the narrator started planning something absolutely wild. If the production guild wanted a fight, he was going to give them a crafting display they'd never forget. A week later, the group arrived at the capital's south gate. Because they were traveling with nobility, they got VIP treatment and skipped the long lines. The narrator had spent the entire trip sitting up front with Alicia, the maid, picking her brain for details about the mountain terrain. They'd grown surprisingly close during the drive, so much so that the narrator felt a little sad the road trip date was ending. As they entered the city, they stumbled upon a heated protest in front of the production guild. A small group of crafters was shouting for their jobs back. Alicia explained that these were the workers the guild had just fired, and they were waiting for Prince Cress to return with good news from the legendary crafter Vice. Just then, an old man named Georgi, the head of the guild, stepped outside. He was the same grumpy guy who had been fighting with Vice weeks ago. Georgi was cold and dismissive. He told the protesters that the guild was officially pulling out of road maintenance, and if they wanted work, they should go beg the government themselves. He called crafters resource wasters who only made junk. When one of the workers argued that they could still handle basic repairs, Georgi shut him down, saying they were just stealing easy jobs from real blacksmith apprentices. He even insulted Cress, calling him a failure who ran away to hide behind a woman. Cress stepped out of the carriage to face him. The tension was thick as the two stared each other down. The fired crafters rushed to Cress, begging for hope, but Cress had to give them the hard truth. The production guild was done with them. However, he offered an alternative. He told them he was heading to the mountains tomorrow to fix the massive avalanche damage himself without the guild's help. He invited anyone who still wanted to be a crafter to join join him and prove their worth to the world. The crowd hesitated. Even with Cress leading them, the task seemed impossible without the guild's backing or Vice's expertise. Georgi just laughed, mocking them and saying they'd probably just die in a landslide. But as soon as the old man went back inside, the narrator decided to shift the mood. He jumped off the carriage and used his magic to dump a massive mountain of logs right in the middle of the street. The sheer shock of seeing that much material appear out of nowhere silenced everyone. While the crafters stared in disbelief, the narrator simply asked, "I've got the supplies. You guys want to build a bridge or what?" Caught up in the moment, the workers found themselves nodding along. With the team assembled, they split up to prepare for the morning departure. Cress, Chiffon, and Liz headed to the palace to get the king's blessing and secure a group of knights for protection. Karen and Mel went to book a tavern for the night. Though Karen was so nervous about meeting new people, she claimed she had a stomach ache. The narrator and Alicia went on a massive shopping spree for food and supplies. Since the narrator could store everything in his magic inventory, where it wouldn't rot, they bought out half the market. As they walked, Alicia started acting much less like a formal maid and more like a regular girl. She admitted she felt comfortable enough around the narrator to let her guard down, even teasing him and getting a bit flustered when he complimented her. She even asked if she could sit next to him on the carriage again for the next trip, blushing hard as she admitted he was the first man she'd ever spent so much time with. The narrator, caught off guard by the sudden romantic vibe, stumbled over his words and accidentally teased her about being scared to sleep alone. Alicia puffed out her cheeks in a fake pout, embarrassed but clearly enjoying the company. With the supplies packed and the team ready, the stage was set for their impossible construction project. The next morning at the capital's west gate, the scene was total chaos. Liz was busy shouting orders to over 30 knights. Prince Cress was trying to pump up a group of nervous crafters, and Alicia was deep in conversation with a middle-aged man. When the leaders spotted the narrator, they came over to explain the situation. Cress mentioned that the king and Chiffon had insisted on such a large guard because they were worried about monsters being attracted to the noise of construction. Meanwhile, Karen was so anxious about all the new people that she was stuck in a loop of introducing herself to every single knight she saw. Liz looked like she'd been through a rough night. It turns out the palace staff had treated her like a princess, but then immediately put her in charge of the entire knight unit. She warned the narrator that the knights were already calling him Captain because they'd heard rumors about how strong he was. To make matters even more intense, Alicia introduced the man she was talking to as the kingdom's vice chef. Chiffon had personally asked him to join the mission just to study and recreate the narrator's crafted cooking. The narrator wasn't thrilled about dealing with high-ranking officials, but he made a deal. He'd provide the food and supplies if Alicia handled the actual social interactions. In exchange, Chiffon promised that the narrator would own 100% of any rare minerals like mithril found during the mission. The journey toward the mountains went smoothly until the group split up. The knights, Liz, Cress, and Alicia were fine, but the regular crafters were struggling to keep up. Karen was so determined not to be left behind that she pushed herself until her legs literally gave out the moment they reached the base of the mountain. While the knights went to fetch water and set up a perimeter, the narrator got to work. He used his magic to dig a massive reservoir for water and began laying down wood blocks for a base camp. During the lunch break, the narrator had Karen craft some ramen for the whole group. Even though the noodles were a bit uneven, the taste was so good it left the vice chef shaking in disbelief. By having Karen, a regular girl, cook something that good using crafting, the narrator successfully motivated the other crafters, showing them that their useless class actually had incredible potential. After lunch, the narrator teamed up with Cress to build a massive dining hall and dormitory. Cress's skills were impressive. The furniture he produced was nearly as good as a professional blacksmith's work. Once the sun went down and the rest of the crafters finally arrived, the narrator called a meeting. He gave everyone a pile of feathers and cloth and told them to craft their own blankets for the night. This was a huge challenge because most crafters usually sew things by hand to avoid making junk, but the narrator wanted them to use their magic. Cress and Karen went first, purposefully showing off their failed blankets full of holes just to make the others feel less embarrassed about being beginners. With the ice broken, the crafters started laughing and bonding over their messy creations. Then, everyone turned to the narrator to see what he could do. He stepped up to his workbench and used his quality improvement skill to craft a blanket so thick, fluffy, and perfect that it looked better than anything found in a luxury hotel. The entire room went silent as the crafters realized just how powerful their class could actually become. The narrator gave them a confident grin and told them that if they worked hard on the mountain pass, they'd eventually be able to make things just as amazing. 2 days later, the dangerous, crumbling cliffs of Mount Norbert were being torn down at a record pace. Normally, the ground here was so loose it was impossible to even stand on, but for a team of crafters, that wasn't a problem. They used their ability to turn materials into solid blocks to build floating stairs and platforms right into the side of the mountain. The narrator even used a special skill to make these blocks stick perfectly in midair, creating a massive spiral staircase to the top and a giant slide to get back down quickly. The work was intense. The crafters would dig up dirt and rocks until their magic pockets were full, then slide down to hand over the materials. The narrator acted as the team captain, rushing to spots where rare ores like iron or mithril were found to mine them personally. While they worked, Liz and the knights kept a sharp lookout. Whenever flying monsters like griffins tried to attack, Liz would order the knights to blast them with magic, scaring them off before they could knock anyone off the high platforms. Down at the base camp, the narrator checked in on the kitchen. He provided Alicia and the vice chef with new crafted recipes like teriyaki chicken sandwiches and fried chicken to keep everyone's spirits up. Alicia was so impressed she asked for a list of specific ingredients so she could study his cooking style more closely. Suddenly, Karen burst in, looking panicked but excited. Thanks to all the digging, her magic storage had suddenly grown massive. She was so happy she accidentally blocked the doorway with a giant wall of dirt just to show off. The narrator encouraged her, knowing that as she leveled up her gathering skills, she'd soon be able to clear huge sections of the mountain in a single swing. Prince Cress also stopped by, looking exhausted. He told the narrator they were running low on tools, because the mountain's clay was so hard it kept snapping their gear. The narrator quickly crafted a fresh batch of high-quality shovels and pickaxes for everyone. Cress admitted that even though he tried to make his own tools using complex magic theories, they weren't nearly as strong as the narrator's simple, high-quality crafts. The narrator was impressed by how hard the prince worked, realizing he was a true perfectionist who didn't rely on his royal status. Once the prince headed back to work, Alicia teased the narrator by calling him captain. She admitted she felt relaxed enough around him to show her playful side, which made the narrator a bit flustered. They started talking about Cress, and Alicia revealed that the prince had been the top student in his magic academy, proving he was a genius despite his useless class. When the narrator complimented Alicia on being a battle maid, she got shy. She explained that most people find a fighting maid scary, but the narrator told her he actually preferred it and would love to hire someone like her once he built his own home base. Alicia blushed hard and promised that once Chiffon became the official ruler, she'd love to come work for him. By the end of the week, Mount Norbert didn't even look like a mountain anymore. It had been leveled into a flat, high plateau. The team had cleared all the avalanche rubble and were now ready for the final step, building a bridge across a 100-meter-wide canyon to reconnect the highway. The narrator set up a row of furnaces and had the crafters start baking bricks from the mountain's clay. He taught them how to use their repair skill to make the bricks extra strong. While the team prepped the materials, the narrator and Liz headed out over the edge of the cliff to build the bridge's foundation. It was terrifyingly high and the wind was howling, so Liz used her magic to create a windproof barrier around them. As they worked together in the quiet, protected space, Liz suddenly got quiet. She looked at the narrator and whispered that it felt like a long time since they'd been alone together like this. The narrator nearly dropped his tools, wondering why she was suddenly acting so romantic in the middle of a construction zone. Liz kept the wind barrier up as the narrator placed blocks in midair. She suddenly got sentimental, mentioning how it felt like they hadn't spent much time alone since Karen joined the group and the prince gave them this massive job. The narrator tried to stay cool, but inside he was sweating, especially when he realized Liz was acting like a lonely daughter afraid her dad was going to get a new girlfriend. Liz pointed out that both Alina and Alicia seemed to have a crush on him. She claimed Alina's motherly instincts were kicking in because she was always fussing over him, and that Alicia's formal maid act slipped whenever she was around him. The narrator tried to play it off, saying Alicia probably just saw him as a family figure too. But when he mentioned he'd offered Alicia a job at his future home and she'd promised to come, Liz lit up. She loved the idea of having a big sister figure like Alicia around. The conversation turned to Liz herself. She admitted that after losing her parents, she never planned on getting married or having kids because she didn't think she could handle the responsibility. She told the narrator that if she ever did have to marry someone, she'd probably just pick him because he was reliable and sweet, just like her father. It was a total mood swinger that left the narrator feeling more confused than ever. 4 days later, the bridge was halfway done. Prince Cress was leading the charge at the front, while Karen was busy helping the other crafters fix their mistakes. From a distance, the bridge looked impressive, but the narrator and Liz weren't satisfied. Compared to the massive mountain they'd just leveled, the bridge looked tiny and fragile, like it could snap in a stiff breeze. Liz joked that it was way too normal for one of the narrator's projects, and that Vice would be disappointed if they didn't do something more legendary. The narrator asked Alicia for her honest opinion. She admitted that while it was good, people expected something truly impossible from him. That was the final straw. Fearing that a mediocre bridge would make the king look bad and ruin Cress's marriage prospects, the narrator snapped into high gear. He announced a total change of plans. They were going to make the bridge 3 times bigger. The knights and crafters nearly fainted at the news, but the narrator wasn't finished. He decided that since this was a bridge of hope, it needed a landmark. He ordered Prince Cress to head back to the city to grab 10 days' worth of extra supplies, essentially turning the prince into his personal delivery boy. While Cress was away, the narrator decided to build a massive, artistic church right at the edge of the bridge so Cress and Chiffon could get married there. The narrator went into a building frenzy, popping stone blocks into place at high speed. He even planned to make stained glass windows by smelting sand and using flower dyes. Seeing him finally go beast mode, Liz felt relieved that the real narrator was back. Karen, inspired by her master's insane pace, rallied the other crafters to finish the bridge expansion before the narrator finished the church. The mountain echoed with the sounds of construction as the team pushed past their limits to create a monument that would change the kingdom forever. 10 days later, the massive bridge was finally finished, connecting the cliffs like something out of a dream. It wasn't just big, it was rock solid. Miyabi and Karen had spent an entire day enchanting it so it could survive any monster attack. It looked incredibly modern for this world, complete with smooth handrails and decorative carvings. Right next to it stood the church Miyabi had built single-handedly. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows decorated with flowers representing love, and the whole place felt holy and peaceful. Even Liz, who usually didn't care about marriage, found herself staring at it in awe. Miyabi and Liz stood there looking at their work, feeling a bit of burnout because they'd clearly gone overboard. Karen and the other crafters were in total shock too, feeling like gods must have built it. The other workers were now calling Karen Big Sister, because they had looked to her for guidance while Miyabi was busy being a one-man construction crew. Just as they were soaking it all in, a group of knights arrived from the capital. Alicia was driving the lead carriage, and out stepped a man who looked a lot like Prince Cress. Liz whispered that this was King Rock, Cress's older brother. The king and his knights stood frozen, staring at the bridge and the church in total silence. They looked completely defeated by how impossible the structures seemed. Chiffon and Alicia hopped out of the carriage, looking much more relaxed. Chiffon gave Miyabi a wink, thrilled that the project would definitely humiliate the corrupt production guild. When Miyabi worried he'd done too much, Chiffon told him not to sweat it if anyone complained, they'd just blame the legendary blacksmith Weiss. Miyabi noticed the kingdom's vice chef peeking at him, clearly eager to learn more crafted cooking secrets, but Miyabi stayed focused. He realized the 50 arriving knights needed a place to stay. He gathered the other crafters, who were now much more confident. On his command, they went into a building frenzy. Miyabi dumped a mountain of logs and the crafters moved like a blur. In minutes, they built a dormitory, expanded the dining hall, and crafted tables and chairs. The king and his knights watched in disbelief as the useless crafters worked with the speed and precision of elite soldiers. Miyabi realized that while the bridge was a great start, they needed the king's official support to stop the production guild from bullying them. He decided they should build a luxury villa for the king right then and there. He wanted to show that crafters could create a resort better than the royal palace in record time. Karen suggested making it feel like Miyabi's cozy base, and Miyabi agreed, dumping more supplies for them to use. He decided to act like a proud teacher, letting his students do the work while he just contributed a super soft enchanted bed that would guarantee the king a good night's sleep. As Miyabi watched them work, he noticed Karen had become much more social and loud, leading the group with a smile. She even mentioned that the church's holy aura seemed to be keeping monsters away. Miyabi realized his high-level enchantments had basically created a protective barrier around the area. Just then, Liz tapped his shoulder with a serious face. The king wanted a private meeting. Miyabi met King Rock inside a room in the new church. The atmosphere was heavy. The king admitted he was purely curious about the man who had helped his brother. He confessed that he hadn't fully read Chiffon's reports because he was too busy with politics, but seeing the bridge with his own eyes had changed everything. He was torn. As a brother, he was proud of Cress. But as a king, he was worried that building such a high-tech city in the mountains would look like they were preparing for war. Chiffon stepped in, arguing that this highland city would actually be a massive boost for trade and tourism. Miyabi agreed, saying he just wanted a place where crafters could work in peace. He told the king that the bridge wasn't a weapon, it was a bridge of hope. The meeting was interrupted by Alicia, who announced that dinner was ready. Chiffon had kept Miyabi's magical cooking a secret until now to give the king one final shock. She knew that once the king tasted the food and saw the luxury villa the crafters had built in an afternoon, he wouldn't be able to say no. Chiffon smiled, knowing she had successfully trapped the king into supporting their new city. All that was left was for the king to realize that the world of crafting had changed forever. The king followed Chiffon and a maid to a cozy log cabin for dinner. He recognized the style as something elves love, a log house meant for relaxation. He was confused because he didn't remember seeing this building earlier, but as soon as he stepped inside, his jaw hit the floor. The place was stunning, lit by fancy lanterns with a natural wood scent that filled the air. Everything from the curtains to the cabinets was perfectly crafted. When he saw the food on the table, he nearly lost his cool. Even as a king, he'd never seen dishes like these. Chiffon noticed his shock and told him he didn't have to act tough since it was just family. As they sat down, the king admitted his head was spinning. Between the impossible bridge, the holy church, and now this luxury cabin, everything felt like a dream. Chiffon just smiled, saying this was normal for Miyabi, and started slurping a bowl of dark soup with long noodles. She explained it was soy sauce ramen, recreated by the chefs based on Miyabi's recipe. The king, thinking it was unrefined to make noise while eating, eventually took a bite and was blown away. The salty, savory broth and chewy noodles were unlike anything he'd ever tasted. Then he tried the gyoza dumpling, which exploded with juice, and the fried chicken, which was so crispy and flavorful he knew it would cause a literal riot of joy among his knights. By the time he finished the teriyaki sandwich, he was totally sold. He realized the useless builder class had evolved into something world-changing. After hearing Chiffon explain how Miyabi's skills worked, the king's brain was officially fried. The next day, the group headed back to the royal capital. The builders, who used to be weak and tired, now had amazing stamina from all their hard work. When they reached the city gates, the king stepped out of his carriage and dropped a bombshell. He invited the entire group of builders into the castle as honored guests. The builders were terrified and confused. Usually, only the best blacksmiths ever get invited to the palace, and here they were, a bunch of guys who had just been kicked out of their guilds, being treated like heroes. They were so stiff with nerves they hid behind Miyabi and Liz as they walked in. The king even let them use the royal baths, a luxury they could never afford. While the workers went to wash up, the king pulled Miyabi aside for a private chat. He wanted to clear up the paperwork. Since the bridge was done, the original mission was technically over, but the new city project was a whole different beast. Miyabi told the king he didn't want all the credit or the money, he wanted the reward split among all the builders. He also told the king he planned to step back and let Prince Cress lead the construction of the new city, as he wanted the builders to learn to create things freely without him doing everything for them. The king was impressed by Miyabi's selflessness, though Miyabi was secretly feeling a bit guilty. He didn't mention that he had spent his nights secretly mining a massive haul of rare mithril ore from the mountainside, something he kept for himself. Since he already had the riches he wanted, he was happy to let the others have the gold. The king agreed to hire the builders directly to protect them from greedy guild, which made Miyabi happy. As the meeting wrapped up, the king's eyes lit up. He mentioned how much he loved the bed in the log cabin and asked to buy two, one for him and one for the queen. Even though they cost a fortune, the king didn't blink. Miyabi realized that even without the official mission reward, he was about to walk away with a massive pile of cash just from selling furniture. After setting up the king's new beds, Miyabi collected a massive payment of 400 gold coins. While the royal accountant was strict, the king's backing made the transaction smooth. On his way to the baths, Miyabi's terrible sense of direction got him lost in the castle's maze-like halls. Luckily, he ran into Alicia, the maid who had looked after them during the bridge project. She was impressed that he'd already closed a deal with the king, noting that the royal family hadn't bought furniture from a builder in years. Miyabi admitted he was a bit overwhelmed by the king's intense personality, but Alicia reassured him that the king was a good man, much like his brother Prince Cress. When she realized Miyabi was lost near the private female quarters, she teased him about his lack of direction and offered to lead him to the bath. As they walked, Miyabi shared his plan to step back from the new city project and return to his base, letting the other builders take the lead. He wanted them to enjoy their new freedom and build things they actually liked, just like the luxury cabin they had made for the king. Alicia noticed how much Miyabi had changed the builders' lives, turning them from tired, broken men into confident creators. As things got sentimental, Alicia suddenly stopped and turned red. She asked about his relationship with Liz, and Miyabi explained it was more like a father-daughter bond. Liz even called him Papa when she was sleepy. To his total shock, Alicia took his hands and asked if she could call him Papa too. She claimed she was a Papa's girl and felt that Miyabi was about 60% father figure to her. Miyabi politely declined the strange request, feeling more confused than flattered. When they finally reached the baths, Miyabi found all the builders waiting outside. They hadn't started washing because they felt it was disrespectful to go in before their leader. Touched by their loyalty, Miyabi realized they had finally become a real team. Over the next 5 days at the castle, the builders practiced magic under Karen's guidance. Since most production guilds ignored builders, these men had never learned proper mana control. They were preparing for a massive royal event where the king would invite lords from across the land to see the impossible bridge and the new city. This was the official debut of the Craft Squad, a special national unit. While Miyabi was invited to join, he turned it down, preferring his life as a free adventurer. To secure the builder's future, Prince Cress and Miyabi headed to the production guild to settle an old score with Chairman Jorgi. The chairman, who hated builders and had tried to kick them out years ago, was still arrogant, believing the builders had failed their mission. He was stunned when Cress handed him an official royal decree stripping him of his position for oppressing skilled workers. Jorgi lost his mind, claiming builders were trash who couldn't make anything high quality. To shut him up, Miyabi pulled out his workbench and instantly crafted a high-rank, luxury feather bed right in front of him. Prince Crest did the same, showing that even he had surpassed the chairman's expectations. Seeing the useless class produce master-level items broke Jorgi's spirit. He collapsed in shock as the group left the guild, finally ending his reign of greed and proving to the world that builders were the true future of the kingdom. After leaving the production guild, Miyabi and Prince Crest split up. Miyabi, knowing his terrible sense of direction, started looking for a maid to help him find his way through the castle. Instead, he bumped into Mel, the cat beast girl adventurer. She immediately called him out for being lost again, but she was mostly excited because Miyabi had promised to make her a giant stuffed animal. Miyabi realized that even though Mel looks like a kid, she's a pro who handles high-level jobs for nobles all by herself. To thank her for guiding him, he offered to make the plushie right then. Mel led him to a quiet room by the hand, her tail wagging happily the whole way. On the way, she complained that she hates going to the Adventurers Guild because the boss there talks too much. Miyabi asked how much it would cost to hire her as a bodyguard since he can't fight, and Mel told him she'd do it for more stuffed toys instead of money. They arrived at a room and burst inside, surprising Liz and Alicia, who were having a serious talk. Miyabi scolded Mel for not knocking, but he noticed Liz acting really weird and avoiding eye contact. Alicia looked awkward too, like she was keeping a secret. Finally, Liz handed Miyabi a piece of paper. It was an application for the Magic Academy. It turns out Chiffon and Alicia had been encouraging Liz to go to school to study magic, which had always been her dream. Liz was torn because she didn't want to leave Miyabi alone, especially now that they were doing so well as adventurers. Miyabi, acting like a proud dad, told her she had to go. He knew she'd been saving every penny for this and didn't want her to give up her dream just to look after him. After some back and forth, Liz admitted she was scared their partnership would end, but Miyabi promised to build a massive home base and wait for her to graduate. Mel and Alicia gave them some space, and Miyabi finally convinced Liz to take the leap. 3 weeks later, a huge crowd gathered at the capital's west gate. Nobles, knights, and guild members were all heading out to see the new bridge and the city at the plateau. The craft squad was there, looking surprisingly confident, though Karen was a nervous wreck until Miyabi calmed her down. Even the legendary dwarf Weiss showed up to support them. Prince Cress thanked Miyabi for everything, promising to turn the plateau into a dream city. As the royal group headed west, Miyabi headed to the south gate to start his own journey back to his base. He wasn't alone, though Mel was coming with him. Liz was there to say goodbye, looking absolutely miserable. Even though she was only going to school for a 6-month study program, she was acting like they were parting forever. Chiffon and Alicia were there to take her to the dorms, trying to keep her calm. Miyabi gave Liz a final pep talk, telling her to study hard and promising to see her in half a year. As he and Mel walked away, they could hear Liz wailing in the distance, finally letting out all her tears. Mel, seeing Miyabi looking a bit sad himself, reached out and held his hand to comfort him. With a small smile, Miyabi took her hand, and the two of them set off toward their next adventure. Miyabi and Mel set off from the royal capital, and after a few hours of walking, Mel suddenly veered off the main road into a meadow. Even though Miyabi worried about monsters, he couldn't say no to her, especially since she's a B-rank adventurer and he's just a builder who can't fight. As they walked hand in hand, her tail happily thumping against him, Miyabi felt lucky to have such great friends. He started planning how to build an amazing home base to convince Mel to stay with the team permanently before Liz finished school. Mel led him to a beautiful field of flowers to rest. To thank her for the sweet surprise, Miyabi pulled out some salted fish he'd prepared with Liz's help. Mel's ears twitched with joy as she happily munched away, proving that even a pro adventurer can't resist a good snack. While they ate, Miyabi asked why she lived in inns instead of buying a house. Mel explained that managing a property is a pain she hates weeding and prefers having a maid clean her room. Miyabi saw his chance and offered to build her a custom cat house right on his property. He promised she'd have her own small, cozy room filled with stuffed animal, plus access to his cooking and a giant bath. Mel didn't hesitate for a second. "I'm moving in." The journey back to Angelm City took a week. While Mel was buzzing with excitement about her new house, Miyabi stopped by the Adventurers Guild first. He caught up with Aliner, the guild staffer, and explained that Liz was away at school. Aliner was just relieved he was safe after the dangerous bridge project. Next, they hit the Merchant Guild to handle the paperwork for tearing down the old, ruined mansion on Miyabi's land. Mel kept tugging at his sleeve, acting like an impatient kid because she wanted to start building immediately. When they finally reached the plot of land, Mel pointed right next to the entrance that was where she wanted her house. Miyabi got to work, using his pickaxe and scaffolding to clear the old wreckage. He spent the next 6 months focused on one thing, creating a home that would blow Liz away when she returned. He even consulted Mel on how to surprise her, though Mel's only suggestion was grilling meat on the roof. Time flew by, and soon it was summer. Miyabi traveled back to the royal capital alone to pick up Liz for her graduation. He waited outside the Magic Academy and spotted her. She looked a bit more grown-up with longer hair, but she was still the same old Liz. They had a sweet reunion, and Liz teased him about getting letters from Alicia the maid. Miyabi didn't have the heart to tell her that Alicia's letters started with Dear Papa, and that she only grew her hair out because Alicia told her Papa would like it. Inside the dorms, Miyabi used his infinite inventory to pack up Liz's massive mountain of textbooks. Liz admitted that while she studied like a maniac, she discovered a frustrating truth. She physically can't use high-level magic because her body can't process enough mana at once. She was devastated, but Miyabi cheered her up by reminding her that her casting speed is world-class. As they walked out, Liz finally asked where Mel was. She was confused why Miyabi was in the capital unprotected. Miyabi just gave her a mysterious grin and told her, "Welcome back to the world of the impossible." He had spent 6 months building something far beyond a normal house, and he couldn't wait to show her that being a useless builder meant he could change her entire world. Miyabi and Liz started walking through the capital, and it felt just like old times. Liz was confused when Miyabi led her away from the usual path, but he explained he'd found a shortcut back to Enrollment City. He led her to a tiny, plain wooden shack on a small plot of land he'd secretly bought with all his savings. Liz was skeptical, but Miyabi was buzzing with excitement. This shack wasn't a house. It was the entrance to his biggest project yet, a subway station. Inside, they headed down a long spiral staircase lit by glowing magic blocks. Liz started getting worried, asking if Miyabi had joined a weird cult or lost his mind while she was away. Miyabi just laughed it off, promising it would all make sense soon. At the bottom, the space opened up into a massive underground tunnel reinforced with magic. 2 sets of mithril rails stretched into the darkness, powered by wind magic to move things at incredible speeds. One line went toward the plateau, and the other headed straight for Enrollment City. Waiting for them at the platform was the mobile base which Miyabi had modified to act like a train car. Mel was standing there wearing a conductor's hat, taking her new job very seriously. Liz was speechless as they hopped inside. Mel gave the signal, Miyabi pulled the magic brake, and the entire house began to slide along the rails. As the house picked up speed, Liz completely lost it. She couldn't wrap her head around a running house, even as she watched the tunnel walls blur past. Mel kept it professional, warning Liz to stay behind the yellow safety line Miyabi had painted on the floor. Within a minute, the house hit its top speed, about 300 kilometers per hour thanks to the high-end mithril components. To calm the chaos, Miyabi served up fresh bowls of ramen. Liz tried to stay mad at the absurdity of it all, but the smell of tonkatsu ramen eventually won her over, even if she did keep shouting about how houses aren't supposed to move. 3 hours later, they arrived at the terminal in Enrollment City. Liz was in a total daze from the jet coaster ride, but the real shock came when they stepped outside. Over the last 6 months, Miyabi had transformed his empty plot of land into a luxury estate. Right at the entrance sat Mel's cat house, a round, adorable dome with cat ears, paw-print windows, and a yawning cat mailbox. Next to it was the main base, a stunning 3-story mansion made of white stone with a deep blue roof. It was decorated with moon and star symbols to match their team name, Moonlight Rabbit. It had elegant balconies, beautiful flower beds, and custom glass windows where the rabbit illustrations seemed to jump and play depending on the angle you looked at them. Liz panicked, worried that building something this fancy would offend the local lord, but Miyabi pointed out that they were now best friends with the prince and the kingdom's top heroes. Realizing they had the ultimate VIP pass, Liz finally relaxed and fell in love with the place. Inside, the house was perfectly chilled thanks to ice magic cooling built into the walls, a cool house version of the heated home Miyabi made before. He'd even added a secret underground war room for that cool adventurer vibe Liz always wanted. Mel immediately dragged Liz toward the baths to show off the new sauna she used for spiritual training. As the girls headed off to soak, Miyabi smiled, already reaching into his inventory to prep some ice-cold milk for them to chug after their bath. He was finally home and his team was back together. The next morning, the sun was blazing, but Miyabi's cool house kept things nice and chilly. He sat alone at the table, enjoying a fresh tomato and ham sandwich with some homemade mayo that tasted way better than the store-bought stuff. Looking out the window, he saw Mel happily watering the flowers. Even though she hated weeding, she loved taking care of the garden. Miyabi had already arranged for a leaner, the kind guild staffer who was like an older sister to them, to watch the place whenever they went on trips. Liz finally crawled out of bed, looking like a messy-haired student on summer break. She admitted she was struggling to switch back from study mode to adventure mode, especially since the high-speed subway ride home didn't give her any time to adjust. Miyabi told her to hurry up and fix her hair because they had a big day planned. He reminded her of a promise he made 6 months ago, to hang out with Alina as a celebration for her graduation. Liz panicked, realizing she almost missed her chance to look good for her friend, and rushed to get ready just as Alina arrived at the door looking lovely in a sundress and straw hat. Once everyone was ready, Miyabi led the group to his secret subway station. They were heading to the Norville Plateau, a luxury resort city being built by the Craft Squad. Since the builders considered Miyabi their leader, he had special permission to use the facilities for a test run before the grand opening. They hopped into the mobile base and set off. Inside the moving house, they had a little tea party, though Miyabi served corn soup instead of tea. While Mel distracted him with her favorite stuffed animals, Liz and Alina chatted. Alina noted how much Liz had grown up, while Liz marveled at how Alina had totally adapted to Miyabi's crazy invention. They joked about how dangerous a high-speed subway would be if a villain used it for a surprise invasion, but Miyabi reassured them that he'd hidden the tunnels with heavy magic blocks. Alina admitted she used to worry about Miyabi's impossible buildings, but now she realized he just builds things to make people happy. Liz agreed, saying he was like a caring father figure who always worked hard to solve her problem. Miyabi overheard them and felt a bit depressed. He realized that despite all his efforts, the girls saw him as a dad, a brother, or a friend, but never a romantic interest. The train arrived at the plateau in just 20 minutes. They climbed the stairs and emerged into the workshop of Karen, Miyabi's star student. The room was a mess of tools and materials, proving that all builders are a bit chaotic when they're focused. Karen was startled to see them, as she still treated Miyabi like a legendary figure and got nervous around him. She had been working herself to the bone as the head of the project, managing the construction funded by the merchant guilds and protected by the king's knights. Miyabi led the girls out of the workshop and into the main attraction, a massive indoor tropical resort. It featured a giant dome ceiling, 3 sparkling pools, and soft white sand that made the mountain plateau feel like a sunny beach. While the girls stood there with their jaws dropped, Miyabi checked in with Karen. She was stressed about getting the water temperature perfect, so Miyabi offered to help with the final technical tweaks. As the girls headed to the changing rooms, Mel, who had already visited the pool twice with Miyabi, led the way like a pro. The women's changing area was a total VIP zone, featuring pink floral walls, lounge sofas, and a revolutionary invention: the magic shower. Miyabi had used mithril and wind magic to create pressurized warm water, a luxury that didn't exist anywhere else in this world. Just before going in, Liz stopped Miyabi, looking flustered. She held up 2 swimsuits, one pink and one yellow, and asked which one he liked better. Miyabi was caught off guard, thinking this was a question for a boyfriend, not a dad. He nervously suggested the yellow one since it matched the flower she always wore in her hair. Liz blushed, grabbed the yellow suit, and skipped into the changing room, clearly thrilled with his choice. After changing into swimsuits, Mel and Liz wasted no time diving into the pool. Mel, being a cat beast girl, normally shouldn't like water, but she was having a blast, paddling around with her tail wagging like a rudder. Liz was right behind her, treating the pool like a giant version of the baths back home. The narrator realized how revolutionary this place was. In this world, the idea of a pool didn't exist. Most people were too scared of monsters to swim in rivers, and nobles wouldn't dream of stripping down to swimsuits outdoors where they'd be easy targets for assassin. This indoor resort solved all that. To keep things safe, the narrator planned to hire female knights and battle maids like Alicia had mentioned to act as lifeguards and security. As the girls swam, Alina joined them in a classy black swimsuit. She looked calm and graceful, though the narrator suspected she secretly wanted to splash around just as much as the kids. The narrator stayed on the sidelines to perform a final safety check on the facility. Liz swam over and tried to get him to join, even offering to teach him how to swim, but he played it cool. He knew that once you started a water fight with adventurers, things got painful fast. Sure enough, a water war broke out. Mel ambushed Liz with a massive splash, and Alina jumped in, using her mana to launch water like a pro. The 3 of them were soon locked in a high-level magic water battle that looked more like a combat zone than a vacation. The narrator was glad he brought them before the grand opening. If a regular noble girl got caught in that crossfire, it would be a national disaster. While the girls were busy, the narrator checked the flowing pool. It used mithril blocks and water pressure to create a current which required precise tuning so it wasn't too dangerous. He smoothed out the stone edges with his hands to make sure no one would get scratched. The girls eventually moved over to this pool, and even though the current was strong, they treated it like a training exercise swimming against the flow, using magic to create whirlpools and speed boosts. Next, the narrator inspected the 2 water slides. One was a gentle lady slide for a smooth ride, and the other was the wild slide, built for speed and thrills. As he reached the top of the wild slide to check the railings, he leaned out to wave at Liz. In a split second, he lost his balance and fell right onto the track. Without any mental preparation, the narrator was launched down the slide. Because his student, Karen, had polished the surface to be perfectly smooth, there was no way to slow down. He picked up terrifying speed, screaming as he hit a section that actually did a full vertical loop. He realized Karen had built a total scream machine without telling him. He flew out the end and hit the main pool with a massive splash, totally dazed and shaking from the adrenaline. Liz swam over to help him out. He was so rattled he actually held her hand for support as she led him to the side, feeling more like a scared kid than a papa figure. They sat together on the pool deck, watching Mel and Alina take their turns on the slide. Liz admitted she was too scared to try the fast one after seeing his face, but she stayed by his side to keep him company while he calmed down. As they sat there, the narrator noticed how much Liz had matured. With her wet hair and new swimsuit, she looked less like a student and more like a young woman. They talked about how the builders had turned a simple lake into this massive resort. Liz mentioned that the city was already becoming a hot topic at the Magic Academy, and many students were planning to visit during their summer break. Alina eventually finished her swim and walked toward them. Before she reached them, Liz whispered some advice to the narrator. Tell her she looks pretty in that swimsuit. Be straight with her. When Alina sat down, the narrator followed orders and told her the swimsuit looked great on her. Alina just laughed, teasing him for being such a smooth talker, but wishing he'd at least blushed a little while saying it. Even in a world of magic and monsters, the narrator realized that understanding a woman's heart was the hardest job of all. Miyabi pulled a towel and a drink from his inventory for Alina, who looked completely wiped out from the water slides. She joked that her age was catching up to her, but Miyabi assured her she didn't need to push herself just for Liz's sake. Alina gave him a knowing look, teasing him about how much he and Liz clearly cared for each other, which made Miyabi a bit flustered. She even mentioned hearing that Liz cried when they had to part ways in the capital. Miyabi realized the cat girl Mel must have been gossiping, proving that no matter the world, girls love talking about romance. The conversation turned back to the facility, and Alina pointed out that the wild slide was way too intense for noble ladies. She warned that most would be terrified just looking at it. Miyabi agreed. He'd built it for thrills, but realized it was better suited for rough-and-tumble adventurers. He decided to move the scary slide to the commoner's pool area and build something much gentler for the noble. His assistant Karen was a bit sad to hear her high-speed creation was too much, but Miyabi cheered her up by admitting it was so fast he thought he'd been greased up like a lightning bolt. Later, Miyabi and Karen walked through the town to check for any issues before the grand opening. The place was looking great, with creative touches like heart-shaped windows and magic streetlights. Karen admitted she'd become obsessed with perfecting every detail, which Miyabi realized was probably his fault for showing her so many crazy inventions. She even revealed that the local knights were calling the town a paradise, because the crafters had invented breezy shirts infused with wind magic to keep them cool under their heavy armor. As the sun began to set, Karen led Miyabi to the local church, mentioning a creepy person who had been hanging around praying and asking for him. To Miyabi's shock, it was Georgie, the former head of the production guild who had been kicked out months ago. Georgie didn't look angry anymore, he looked tired and calm. He dropped a bombshell of a warning. Miyabi needed to hide his identity as the sole builder of the church. He explained that high-level scouts could use appraisal skills to find out who built a structure, making Miyabi a prime target for assassins. He advised Miyabi to have others help with small renovations to confuse the magical signature of the building. Before leaving, Georgie gave one last warning. Watch out for the neighboring Timel Empire. He hinted that the massive avalanche that destroyed the old mountain road months ago wasn't a natural disaster, but a calculated attack by foreign saboteurs. While Miyabi wasn't sure if he could fully trust a former enemy, the advice felt too specific to ignore. He asked Karen to keep the conversation a secret, but told her to go ahead and modify the church a bit to mask his work. As Georgie walked away into the sunset, Miyabi realized that building a paradise was only half the battle. Now he had to protect it from the shadows of international politics. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Miyabi and the girls headed to a large open plaza he designed to look like a peaceful meadow. He had a major craving for a classic barbecue, and with his crafting skills, he set up the stone foundation and charcoal blocks in seconds. While Karen was her usual shy self, Alina jumped right in to help him prep the meat and veggies, showing off her old adventurer skills. Liz and Mel were confused why he was cooking manually instead of just crafting the finished meal, but Miyabi explained that the sizzle and the smoky smell were half the fun. Plus, thanks to the church's magical barrier, they didn't have to worry about the smell attracting monsters. The real challenge was Mel, who only wanted to eat meat. Miyabi had to bribe her with veggies covered in his secret weapon, a sweet and savory barbecue sauce he'd recreated from his past life. It worked like a charm, and soon everyone was digging into a feast of minotaur, black orc, and snowbird meat. The group was blown away by the flavor, especially when Miyabi showed them how to wrap the juicy meat in fresh lettuce. Even Karen, who insisted that radish ponzu was the only way to eat meat, couldn't help but enjoy the vibe. As they ate, Karen mentioned she couldn't see the barbecue sauce recipe in her crafting menu. Miyabi realized that in this world, you can't craft what you haven't tasted or invented yourself. His menu was only full because of his memories of Japanese food. He played it cool, claiming he just got flashes of inspiration while working. The conversation took a sharp turn when a leaner teased Miyabi about building a whole church just to impress Liz. Before he could explain it was actually for Prince Cress, the girls started gossiping about his secret romantic plan. Even the shy Karen got excited about the drama. To shut them up, Miyabi quickly whipped up some yakisoba on the grill. The new dish worked as a distraction until Liz decided to feed Miyabi a piece of meat, sparking a full-blown couple moment that had a leaner and Karen staring them down. Miyabi quickly stuffed his face with noodles just to escape the awkwardness. After the feast, they hopped into Miyabi's mobile base to head back to the city of Angelum. The long day of swimming and eating finally caught up with Liz, who fell fast asleep at the table. Miyabi gently covered her with a blanket, noticing she looked more like a tired kid than a tough adventurer. Alina joked that they'd played a bit too hard, but she appreciated how Miyabi looked out for everyone. As the base approached the capital for a transfer, Liz was still dead to the world. When Miyabi tried to wake her, she went into sleepy mode, hugging him and calling him dad while asking for a piggyback ride. Despite the teasing glares from Mel and Alina, Miyabi had no choice but to carry her on his back while he manually adjusted the base's magical tracks. As he struggled with the weight, he couldn't help but wonder if he was actually a legendary crafter or just a glorified babysitter. The next morning, Miyabi left the house early, leaving Liz to sleep in while Mel watered the flowers. It was a big day, the official launch of the breezy shirts and cooling towels Karen had invented. To make sure they'd be a hit, Miyabi had already given out samples to gossipy nobles and Prince Cress. He knew that people usually looked down on crafters, so he needed this launch to go perfectly to change their minds. When he arrived at the shop, he was relieved to see a massive line of noble ladies already waiting. Even the local lord was standing at the front of the line himself, which pretty much guaranteed nobody would complain about the wait. While watching the crowd, Miyabi ran into Weiss, the legendary blacksmith. Weiss laughed, saying the shop was so overwhelmed they were already panicking about restocking. He admitted he'd been bragging about the gear to his fellow smiths, which acted as a huge endorsement, since blacksmiths desperately needed a way to stay cool while working near hot furnaces. Weiss then asked Miyabi for a favor. If he ever went to the Demon Empire, could he look for something called magic crystals? Miyabi was confused because he didn't know much about the local geography. Weiss explained that the Demon Empire was located just south of the city, through a dangerous place called the Demon Forest. It was home to demons who rarely interacted with humans. Weiss believed these magic crystals were the key to controlling high-level magic gear, acting like a switch to turn magical effects on and off. However, he warned Miyabi never to go there alone, as stepping into demon territory without a guild request was basically a death sentence and could start a war. Despite the danger, the idea of a rare material hooked Miyabi's crafter brain. He headed to the Adventurers Guild and found an A-rank mission to investigate the demon forest. The goal was to check for demon intruders while strictly avoiding any fighting. The reward was a massive 4 million yen equivalent. Since Liz and Mel were high-ranked enough, they could technically take the job. Alina, the guild staffer, warned him that demons don't listen to reason and suggested he stay away, but Miyabi felt confident. With his new wind-powered mithril shovel, he could dig a 3-meter hole in one swing and disappear underground in seconds if things got hairy. To win over Mel for the mission, Miyabi crafted a pink whale plushie. It was a cute, round masterpiece that he knew the cat girl wouldn't be able to resist. He then headed home and called a strategy meeting with the girls in their basement. At first, Liz and Mel treated it like a family meeting, asking for better hot tubs and garden fountains, but Miyabi got them back on track by mentioning the demon mission. Liz and Mel turned serious immediately. They pointed out that the mission was tricky because if they didn't find any demons, they couldn't prove they had finished the job. Mel then dropped a bombshell. She had actually been to the demon forest about 15 times already. She knew exactly where the magic crystals grew and confirmed that as long as you didn't bother the demons, they usually left you alone. She suspected the demons were only crossing the border because something was wrong on their side. With Mel's expert knowledge and the promise of the pink whale plushie as a reward, the team officially decided to take on the dangerous mission. The next morning, the group officially headed out for the demon forest. After a 4-day hike, they reached the edge of the woods and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The trees looked dark and creepy, giving off a heavy vibe that made Miyabi and Liz freeze in their tracks. While they were busy being spooked, Mel was hyped up, punching the air with excitement. She was still obsessed with her new pink whale plushie, keeping it tucked safely in a bag on her hip. Liz, who was still feeling a bit weak after her time at the Magic Academy, tried to convince Miyabi to turn back. She argued that if Mel thought a place was tough, it meant they'd be fighting B-rank monsters at the very least. Miyabi totally agreed, figuring it was better to stay alive than to finish a risky job. However, Mel wasn't having it. She got a wild look in her eyes and blocked their path, refusing to let them leave until she got her reward. She dropped the news that the area was currently crawling with Shadow Wolf King's monsters, so strong they usually required an A-rank team to handle. Despite Liz literally shaking with fear, Mel forced them deeper into the forest. After about 2 hours of walking through the suffocating air, Miyabi spotted what they came for: magic crystals. These green, glowing gems were growing right out of the tree roots like radishes. They were surprisingly light and packed with magical energy, much easier to find than Miyabi expected. While he gathered the loot, Liz stayed on high alert, her magic senses tingling. Suddenly, Liz's radar went off. She sensed a shadow wolf subspecies closing in fast. Even though she was terrified and apologizing to the monster out loud, her reflexes were insane. When the wolf lunged from the shadows, Liz instantly threw up ice walls and froze the ground, trapping the beast's paws. She finished it off with a barrage of ice spikes before Mel even had a chance to step in. Despite her easy win, Liz was still a nervous wreck, convinced she only survived by pure luck. The mood shifted again when Mel suddenly dropped into a serious combat stance, staring deep into the woods. Miyabi panicked, thinking a hostile demon was about to attack and start a war. He grabbed his shovel to hide, but then a small figure dashed out. It was a young demon girl with purple hair, horns, a tail, and cute fangs. She and Mel charged at each other, but instead of fighting, they both pulled out plushies. The demon girl burst into tears, crying that her lovely orc plushie had lost to Mel's pink whale. It turns out the scary demons and Mel were actually just toy-obsessed friends. The girl named Ramai was wary of humans at first, but Miyabi knew exactly how to handle kids. He pulled a white whale plushie from his inventory and offered it as a peace treaty. Ramai's eyes lit up, and she immediately became best friends with him, shaking his hand vigorously. The fun was interrupted when a tall, muscular demon man named Belgus dropped from the trees. He had silver hair, wings, and a massive white polearm. He scolded Ramai for talking to humans, but his tough act crumbled when he saw the quality of Miyabi's craftsmanship. He actually started petting the white whale plushie, clearly impressed. Belgus tried to act tough by offering to buy the toy if Miyabi stayed away from Ramai, but Miyabi stood his ground, offering to share information instead. Since Miyabi wasn't looking for a fight and was a master at making toys, Belgus finally lowered his guard and introduced himself, realizing these humans weren't the typical aggressive invaders they usually dealt with. While the kids played with their plushies, Miyabi sat down for a serious talk with Belgus. The demon explained that the forest was a mess because a massive wave of monster variants had suddenly appeared, messing up the natural balance and making high-level beasts way more aggressive. It turns out the demons weren't invading. They were just trying to clear out the dangerous monsters near the border to keep things from getting out of hand. Belgus was clearly attached to the forest and felt bad seeing it so ruined. Liz, still a bit shaky, whispered to Miyabi that high magic areas usually keep monsters contained, so she wondered why they were acting so weird. She was too scared to ask Belgus herself, so Miyabi stepped in. Just then, a loud thud shook the ground. Belgus and Ramai immediately went on guard. A troll king they had been hunting was back, and this time it wasn't alone. Another one had appeared out of nowhere, which was impossible since king-class monsters don't usually double up like that. Miyabi and the girls decided to help, even though Belgus tried to act tough and refuse human assistance. Liz finally snapped, telling him to stop acting cool while he was bleeding from a leg injury. She took charge like a pro, scolding the legendary demon warrior into silence, while Mel rushed in to distract one troll king, literally punching it through several trees with her sword. Miyabi used his shovel to dig a tunnel under the second one. He nearly got stepped on, but the trap worked, and the monster's foot got stuck. With the beast pinned, Liz showed off how much she'd grown. She summoned 5 massive ice spears and blasted the troll king, ending it in one shot. Meanwhile, Mel and Ramai teamed up to finish the other one, with Mel delivering a heavy overhead strike that buried the monster's head into the dirt. The battle was over, but everyone was exhausted. Liz was out of mana, Belgus was still hurt, and Mel's sword was a broken mess again. They set up a temporary camp inside a magical barrier Ramai created. Miyabi pulled out some herbs to treat Belgus, but the demon was stubborn, claiming his body would heal itself in a few hours. Liz wasn't having it. Feeling confident after her big win, she forced Belgus to sit down and let her apply the medicine, bossing him around until he actually started following her orders. While Liz played doctor, Miyabi got to work repairing Mel's dragon-tooth sword. Belgus watched in total shock, amazed that a human could fix such a high-level weapon so easily without breaking a sweat. He mentioned that in the Demon Empire, only top-tier alchemists handle gear like that. Miyabi realized that while he was just a crafter, his skills were considered legendary even by demon standards. As they sat there together, humans, beasts, and demons, the old grudges seemed to fade away, replaced by the simple need to fix their gear and get some rest. After finishing the repairs on Mel's sword and checking Liz's gear, the group started walking toward the demon city. Belgus had invited them as a thank you, and since his leg wound had healed surprisingly fast, they were ready to move. The only one struggling was Miyabi, who was carrying a mana-exhausted Liz on his back. Liz was in a great mood, kicking her legs like a happy kid being carried by her dad, but for a non-combat crafter like Miyabi, the extra weight was a nightmare. He was only surviving thanks to the breezy shirt and cooling towel Karen had made, which kept his body from overheating during the heavy lifting. After 30 minutes of walking, Miyabi asked Belgus how much further it was. Belgus kept saying almost there, but eventually admitted that almost for a demon meant another hour of walking. It turns out demons live for about 400 years. Belgus himself was 182, so their sense of time and distance was totally different from human. Meanwhile, the young demon girl Ramai and the cat girl Mel were bonding over the fact that they were both 13. They joked about how they first met when Ramai tried to eliminate Mel and got beaten up instead. Miyabi realized that demons had a wild culture where fighting to the death was just their way of making friends. Despite the long trek, they finally reached the demon city. It was smaller than the human capital, surrounded by low walls and guarded by demon soldiers. When they approached, the guards stood at attention, calling Belgus Lord Belgus. Miyabi realized their new friend was a much bigger deal than he let on. To enter the city as humans, the guards gave Miyabi and Liz headbands with demon horns as a sign of friendship. It felt like wearing a cheap costume, but it satisfied the guards. Inside, the city felt like a quiet, rural town, though instead of paved roads, the ground was hard-packed dirt. As they walked, Miyabi noticed that while humans used a mix of technology and magic, demons used magic for everything. He saw people using wind magic to dry their laundry or butcher meat at the local shop. Belgus stopped to buy 5 kilos of steamed buffalo meat for dinner, assuming everyone only ate meat. Miyabi had to explain that humans need veggies too, but he told Belgus not to worry since he had plenty of supplies in his inventory. Liz whispered to Miyabi that Belgus had a king-like aura, and her hunch was confirmed when they reached a massive, old-fashioned mansion. Ramai proudly revealed that Belgus was actually one of the 4 heavenly kings of the demon empire, making him the strongest person in the city. Because demons have incredible hearing, the whole neighborhood heard Liz praising Belgus's impressive horn. The tough demon warriors nearby started blushing and acting shy, and even Belgus turned bright red, embarrassed by the compliments as he led them inside. At the mansion, they were greeted by an elderly demon butler named Jizzle, who looked like a classic gentleman with long, thin horn. Jizzle was shocked to see humans for the first time in 200 years, but immediately noticed Miyabi was struggling to carry Liz. He kindly offered to lead them to a lounge so Miyabi could finally put her down. Once settled in the gray, old-fashioned room, Liz explained that the thick magic in the forest had messed with her body, which was why her mana wasn't recovering normally. Belgus admitted he'd brought them to the city specifically because the forest's high magic concentration can be toxic to humans who stay too long. As they waited for dinner, Mel suddenly demanded barbecue sauce, calling it the flavor of justice. Since the demon butler had no idea what that was, Miyabi offered to go to the kitchen to help cook and get a look at demon craftsmanship. Liz, now feeling much better and totally comfortable around the legendary demon king, asked Miyabi to leave her a plushie so she could play with Ramai while he was gone. Miyabi couldn't help but laugh at how quickly his friends had adapted to living in a demon's house. Miyabi arrived at the kitchen with Jizzle, the elderly demon butler, and was surprised by how empty it was. Since demons mostly eat meat and don't use many seasonings, the room only had a basic cutting board, a knife, and a large iron plate. Jizzle set down the fresh meat, and Miyabi pulled out a bottle of his homemade barbecue sauce. Jizzle was fascinated, adjusting his glasses to study the sauce with even more excitement than the cat girl Mel. Miyabi explained that the sauce was a bit sweet and offered to let Lord Belgus and Ramai try it. In exchange, Miyabi asked if he and Liz could use some of the high-quality salt sitting on the counter. Jizzle agreed, explaining it was magic salt gathered from a nearby lake which helped with recovery from fatigue. As Jizzle began searing the meat to perfection, he opened the barbecue sauce and was instantly blown away by the rich, savory aroma. He even decided to cook a massive extra portion for himself as a butler's privilege, admitting that, as an alchemist, he was naturally curious about human inventions. Jizzle revealed that productive classes are rare and highly respected among demons, even if they call him Alchemist Old Man. He flipped the meat and added the sauce, creating a sizzling sound and a smell that filled the room. After taking a bite, Jizzle's eyes widened. He correctly identified the sweetness of the onions and the presence of soy sauce, despite demons not usually eating vegetable. Miyabi was stunned. He realized that while his own crafting skills relied on memories, demon alchemists could learn recipes just by tasting something. Jizzle's centuries of experience made him a master of his craft, and he challenged Miyabi to show his own skill. Miyabi accepted, instantly crafting a perfectly cooked steak using the magic salt in just 1 second. Jizzle was impressed by the speed, and the two creators felt a mutual respect. After dinner, the group sat down for a serious talk. Miyabi explained that they were sent by the Adventurers Guild to investigate the border because people had spotted demons. Belgus admitted the situation was tense because the neighboring Timel Empire had been invading demon territory and destroying parts of the demon forest, which demons consider a sacred sanctuary. This destruction had messed up the ecosystem, causing monsters to breed faster and become more aggressive. Belgus had been busy dealing with the Empire's border skirmishes and only returned to the forest to fix the monster problem. Liz, feeling brave after her studies, suggested that the forest issues were caused by magic spots places where magic concentration is so high that monsters transform into stronger versions. She theorized that magic crystals were acting like amplifiers, making the problem spread. Belgus realized that demon procrastination was partly to blame. They had ignored the crystals for years. Miyabi checked his inventory and noticed that a clump of dirt he'd picked up near the lake was now labeled Magic Earth. When he held it near a magic crystal, the gem turned a dark, cursed black, proving the soil was being corrupted. The only way to fix it was to use holy magic to purify the area, but the young demon girl Ramai admitted her gear was too broken to channel her powers. Jizzle then dropped a bombshell. He was actually the butler to the previous demon king and had been watching Miyabi's skills. He trusted Miyabi enough to bring out the family's greatest treasure, a white box containing a shattered unicorn staff and a silver unicorn horn. Miyabi realized the staff was a legendary item with a double-layer holy enchantment, something he had never even heard of. He knew he couldn't fix it alone, especially since the craftsmanship was beyond anything a normal alchemist could do. He told Belgus he knew one person back in the Forsha Kingdom who might be able to help, the legendary dwarf blacksmith Weiss. To save the forest and help his new friends, Miyabi prepared to take the demon treasure back across the border. 5 days later, the group arrived back at the city of Angelum. To avoid making a scene, they snuck in through a tunnel Miyabi had dug previously, popping up right inside their secret base. Miyabi had brought Remy and Jijil along from the demon Empire so they could get the family heirloom, the unicorn staff, fixed. Since it was a priceless treasure, Miyabi didn't want to just take it, he wanted the owners there for the repair. Meanwhile, the demon General Belgas stayed behind to handle things in the forest, like hunting monsters and gathering mana stone. Inside the base, Remy was thrilled by the magic gadgets while Jijil was impressed by how the whole house was buzzing with mana. Miyabi told them to stay put, while he went to talk to the local authorities to make sure the demons wouldn't get in trouble. He left Liz and Mel to keep them company, handing over a pile of stuffed toys to keep the girls busy. Miyabi's first stop was Weiss's blacksmith shop. Weiss was a master craftsman who lived for his work, and Miyabi knew that if he promised this wouldn't start a war, Weiss would be dying to see a legendary demon weapon. Miyabi basically dragged Weiss along, bribing him with a massive mana stone he'd found. Weiss was shocked to realize Miyabi had actually gone to the Demon Empire, but he couldn't resist the lure of a rare project. Next, Miyabi swung by the Adventurers Guild to grab Alina. She was confused why the girls weren't with him, but Miyabi promised her it was a fun emergency and rushed her toward the governor's mansion. Soon, the city's three most important people, Weiss, Alina, and Governor Trentz, were all sitting in a room looking very worried. Miyabi laid it all out. The demons were actually friendly, they wanted peace, and they needed help fixing a staff to save the forest. The room went silent. Alina was stressed, but Trent saw a massive opportunity for peace. He agreed to let the demons stay at Miyabi's place in secret while he talked to the king. Weiss was already hooked on the idea of seeing the staff, so the plan was set. The next day, Weiss came over to the base. He was stunned to see Remy and Mel playing like normal kids and Jijil acting like a polite butler. It wasn't the scary demon image he had in his head at all. They all sat down in the meeting room, and Jijil carefully opened the box containing the broken unicorn staff. The second Weiss saw it, his face changed. He picked it up with shaking hands and actually started crying. As a blacksmith, he could feel how much history was in the weapon and how badly it wanted to be fixed. Remy, seeing the old man sobbing, got worried and asked if it was unfixable. Weiss yelled back that of course he could fix it, promising to do whatever it took. Miyabi had already built a private workshop in the yard with high walls so no one could see in. Weiss and Jijil headed out there immediately. They both sat down, prepared to spend days studying the staff together. Seeing the two old craftsmen bonding over their work, Miyabi realized he'd just be in the way, so he left them to it, promising to bring them food while they worked on their masterpiece. It had been 5 days since the repairs on the unicorn staff started. The city was on edge because word had gotten out that demons were staying at Miyabi's place. Even though the regular citizens were just going about their lives, the local guards and the governor were acting like they were preparing for a war. Governor Trentz, who was actually being pretty cool about the whole thing, started visiting Miyabi's house every day. He brought local watermelons as a peace offering, thinking that even if demons only eat meat, they might like some fruit. It turned out to be a massive hit. Remy, the little demon girl, loved the fruit so much she was practically inhaling it. Trent was shocked. He realized that everything humans had been taught about demons being mindless monsters was totally wrong. He and the local guild master, Zion, watched Remy and Mel playing together and realized the demons were basically just like them. Zion, who usually acted like a tough guy, even admitted that. Watching Remy felt like looking at his own granddaughter. While the leaders were bonding over fruit, Jijil, the demon butler, was busy watching Weiss work. He told Miyabi that even though he was a top-tier alchemist himself, Weiss was on a whole different level. Weiss had been working non the next day. Miyabi and Liz took the underground train to the Norbert Highlands. To keep things low-key, they left the demons, Remy and Jijil back at the base with Mel. Miyabi had set up a secret exit that led directly into the house of his student, Karen. Since Liz was with him, he figured popping up in a girl's living room wouldn't be too awkward. The house was surprisingly clean, but before they could look around, someone grabbed Miyabi from behind and held a knife to his throat. A familiar voice asked who they were, and Miyabi immediately realized it was Alicia, the elite battle maid who served Lady Chiffon. Alicia was a bit of a special case because she insisted on calling Miyabi Papa in her letters. Once he identified himself, she put the knife away, though Miyabi was shaken by how easily a maid had snuck up on a B-rank adventurer like Liz. Alicia explained that she was there with Lady Chiffon to meet Prince Cress. It turned out the prince's life was actually in danger, which is why the security was so tight. Liz started panicking, trying to explain they weren't doing anything weird in Karen's house, mostly because she was still trying to play matchmaker between Miyabi and Alicia. Alicia didn't mind the intrusion though. She knew Miyabi well enough to guess he'd just dug a tunnel and driven a horse through it to get there. Miyabi wanted to say hi to Chiffon and Cress, especially since he hadn't seen the prince in 6 months. Alicia looked worried, mentioning that Chiffon and Cress had been chosen to negotiate with the demon. Since they were young and would eventually rule the area, it made sense for them to build a long-term relationship with the long-lived demons. Miyabi tried to calm her down, telling her that the demons were currently staying at his place and were actually very chill, especially if you gave them stuffed toys. Alicia was stunned, realizing that whenever something impossible happened, Miyabi was usually right in the middle of it. Suddenly, Alicia realized Chiffon and Cress were alone at the church on a date. She freaked out, thinking they might do something reckless before they were married and bolted toward the church with Miyabi and Liz right behind her. They burst through the doors just as the young couple was leaning in for a kiss. Alicia screamed for them to stop, causing a massive, awkward scene. Once everyone calmed down in a back room, they realized it was all a big misunderstanding. Chiffon and Cress were just incredibly shy and nervous about their new mission to talk to the demons. After clearing the air, Miyabi pulled out the unicorn staff that Weiss had repaired. He asked Cress if it was okay to add magic to a demon weapon, and the prince agreed, trusting Weiss's judgment that the demons weren't evil. Miyabi took the staff to the church altar, feeling that the weapon was grumpy and needed a holy atmosphere to fully wake up. As he poured his mana into it, the staff began to guide him, showing him exactly where it wanted the energy to go. Miyabi realized the staff had a soul of its own. He performed a high-level enchantment, and the staff began to glow, actually sucking the holy energy right out of the church building to power itself up. The staff transformed, glowing with a pure divine light that felt warm and peaceful. However, because the staff had absorbed so much energy, the protective magic on the church itself had flickered out. Prince Cress noticed this and asked Miyabi to fix the church's enchantments, noting that the magic Miyabi used had upgraded from regular, holy, to divine status. While Miyabi stayed behind to spend the afternoon recharging the church's defenses, Cress and Chiffon headed out to secure the city. Chiffon was especially fired up, declaring that she wouldn't let anyone destroy the church before she could have her wedding there. With the elite battle maids and Chiffon's defensive magic on guard, Miyabi felt safe enough to focus on his work. While Miyabi stayed back to recharge the church's defenses, the city of Norbert faced its first major monster attack since being built. Because the church's barrier was temporarily down, giant beasts rushed the bridge, but Prince Cress and his knights, along with Chiffon's battle maids, handled it perfectly. Chiffon even put up a massive defense spell to keep the buildings safe. Karen, Miyabi's student, was a panicked mess until the danger passed, but once things calmed down, she was back to her usual self, calling Miyabi a god for how strong his magic had become. Prince Cress approached Miyabi with a serious request. He and Chiffon needed to get to the city of Angelum to negotiate with the demons, but their lives were in danger from people who didn't want the kingdom to prosper. They wanted to use Miyabi's secret underground tunnel to sneak out and lose their would-be assassin. Miyabi realized that while he had been busy building things, the prince was dealing with the heavy burden of royalty. Chiffon and Cress joked around to lighten the mood, but they were clearly ready for the mission. Liz, as usual, took a second to catch up to the fact that they were being hunted by killers, To pull off the escape, they set up a decoy. The royal guards dressed up like Cress and Chiffon and headed toward the capital while the real couple snuck into Miyabi's underground train. Even though the train was a modern miracle, Cress and Chiffon weren't even surprised, simply saying, "It's Miyabi, so this is normal." They reached the base in Angelum by nightfall. Mel and Remy were waiting, looking a bit grumpy because they wanted to eat meat but had been stuck eating vegetables lately. Miyabi negotiated a mostly meat dinner with them and sent Mel to grab Weiss the blacksmith for a celebration. Miyabi finally handed the fully repaired unicorn staff to Remy. The little demon girl was so happy she almost tackled him. Even Jigil, the butler, was moved to tears seeing the legendary weapon glowing with divine light again. To break the ice between the humans and demons, Miyabi introduced Remy to Chiffon, who immediately started playing with a stuffed cat toy to win the girl over. It worked instantly. They threw a massive meat party to celebrate. And while everyone else bonded over food and toys, Miyabi and Alicia, the battle maid, ended up stuck doing the dishes. Alicia started calling Miyabi Papa again, explaining that her own father was a butler and her mother was an adventurer, so Miyabi and Liz reminded her of her parents. She teased Miyabi about being in a relationship with Liz, but Miyabi insisted they were just close friends who looked out for each other. Alicia didn't buy it, especially since Liz had cried so much when they were apart. Even though the situation was a confusing mess of parent-child vibes, Alicia was just happy she had a place to work and a family to watch over once her job with Chiffon ended. The night ended with everyone safe, fed, and ready for the peace talks ahead. The next day, the group headed into the Demon Empire to return the fixed unicorn staff. Since bringing a whole army would look like an invasion, Miyabi kept the team small, relying on Liz, Mel, and the elite maid Alicia for protection. When they reached the city gates, the demon guards were shocked to see humans again so soon. To keep the peace, everyone, including Alicia, had to wear those silly demon horn headbands as a disguise. Alicia looked surprisingly good in hers, making Miyabi feel like a proud, albeit confused, father. They found the demon general, Belgas, staring at a massive mountain of mana stones in his yard. He had been clearing them out of the forest to stop the weird magic spikes, but now he had no place to put them. Miyabi saw a golden opportunity. He convinced Belgas to give him the entire pile as payment for fixing the staff. Liz tried to scold Miyabi for being greedy, but Belgas didn't mind to him. The staff's repair was worth way more than some rocks. After a quick parental lecture from Liz, Miyabi happily stashed the loot in his inventory. While Prince Cress and Chiffon stayed behind with the butler Jigil to start official peace talks, Miyabi's team headed into the forest to find the source of the magic corruption. They reached a massive saltwater lake that Belgas suspected was the problem. To test the water, Miyabi pulled out dozens of buckets, earning him the nickname Bucket Man from Mel. The little demon girl Remy stepped up with her newly repaired staff. She said a prayer, and a wave of pure light washed over the lake, purifying the area. But the peace didn't last long. The sudden change in energy angered a massive 50-foot-tall kraken living at the bottom. The giant squid burst out of the water, swinging 8 massive tentacles and looking for a fight. Things got intense fast. Liz threw up ice walls to block the attacks, while Belgas used his raw strength to push the tentacles back. Miyabi scrambled to build heavy stone barricades to protect Remy, but the kraken was smashing through them faster than he could build. Just as the group was starting to feel overwhelmed, Mel stepped forward. She looked completely bored, even as the monster towered over her. With one lightning-fast swing of her sword, she released a massive wave of wind energy that sliced the kraken clean in half. The giant monster fell apart instantly, turning the lake into a quiet scene once again. Mel casually handed her sword to Miyabi, asking for a fresh magic recharge as if she hadn't just taken down a legendary beast in a single hit. After taking down the kraken, Miyabi headed back to the demon city and hosted a massive takoyaki party in General Belgas's yard. He used the kraken meat for the snacks, and it was a huge hit. There were 2 reasons for the party. First, the local demons were grumpy about humans because of a recent spat with a different human empire, so Miyabi wanted to win them over with food. Second, Lady Chiffon suggested the feast as a way to build a bridge between their cultures. While everyone was eating, Liz accidentally burned her mouth on a hot takoyaki. Miyabi tried to help by grabbing some water from his inventory, but he realized he only had salt water from the magic lake. He used his material decomposition skill to instantly separate the salt from the water. To his shock, he realized he had just discovered a way to get magic salt, a super expensive luxury item, for free just by processing lake water. While Liz pouted over her burnt tongue, Miyabi was internally celebrating his new get-rich-quick scheme. Soon, Belgas pulled Miyabi and Prince Cress aside for a private, man-to-man talk in a soundproof basement. The vibe got serious fast. Belgas asked if they thought the Timel Empire, a rival human nation, was behind the magic spikes in the forest. He suspected they were trying to weaken the demons. Cress wasn't so sure. He pointed out that Timel was usually too cautious to mess with uncontrollable monsters. Miyabi kept a straight face during the talk, but he was sweating. He hadn't told them that he found a massive magic crystal inside the kraken, a rare treasure the size of a bowling ball. Since it looked natural and not man-made, he used it as proof that the Empire likely wasn't involved, mostly because he wanted to keep the loot for himself without any drama. Cress mentioned that the Timmel Empire was weirdly perfect. Everyone who went there said it was great, which felt suspicious to him. Plus, news of their border skirmishes with the demons hadn't even reached his ears, suggesting a major cover-up. Regardless of the mystery, Belgas decided it was time for a change. He officially proposed ending the non-interference treaty so the demons and humans could finally start working together. Cress agreed, hoping they could be allies within 5 years. Belgas laughed, saying demons think in terms of 50 years, not 5. Still, the deal was struck. When they went back upstairs and shared the news, Chiffon looked determined to make the peace work while Liz celebrated by slapping Belgas on the back like an old friend. Seeing the legendary demon general just take it, the other demons realized that if their boss respected these humans, they should too. With the treaty gone, a new era for both races was finally starting.